The Whitby Child by Robin Jarvis. Read by Prunella Scales. The broken ruin of the abbey appeared dark and ugly against oppressively black clouds. Its ancient stones were stained by the rain which since the bleak dawn had poured from a slate-coloured sky. Relentlessly it streaked onto the 199 steps, until they glistened like black glass. February was displaying its sourest humour, and all hearts prayed for the rain to cease. No, there was one who did not care. Whitby could be submerged beneath the sea, and what would it matter to her? Alice Boston gazed morosely from the window of her cottage. For the once vigorous 93-year-old, her present condition was a repugnant one. Her valiant battle with Nathaniel Crozier, the vilest man ever to have sullied the world, now seemed difficult to believe. There were times when she even forgot the horrific spectacle of Morgarus, the monstrous serpent whom she had sent back to the caverns beneath the cliffs to perpetual slumber. The life force that had once burned so fiercely was almost entirely quenched, and the old lady was chained inside the prison of her own crippled body. Her left side completely paralysed, she could neither walk nor dress herself, and she mumbled as unintelligibly as a baby. Of course she was not left to fend for herself. Her good but irritating friend Edith Weathers had retired from the post office and moved in. For much of her spinster's life, Edith had cared for her sick mother, and was delighted to be of service once more. What with seeing to Miss Boston of the children, she hardly had time for herself and was enjoying every second. The afternoon grew old, and the light began to fail. Miss Boston slipped into a fitful slumber. "Alice Boston, look at the state of you! Wake up, woman!" Miss Boston's lopsided mouth gaped wide. There, standing by the door, was Prudence Oyster. But Prudence was dead, and what Miss Boston's eyes beheld was merely a phantom. The ghost of Mrs. Joyster, however, behaved exactly as she had done in life. Clicking her tongue, she looked with undisguised disdain around the sick-room. "Alice, I am disgusted with you. Such apathy!" Miss Boston gave a pitiable grunt. "Don't you oink at me, Alice Boston," retorted Prudence. "Why, you're even dribbling. Where did the terror of Whitby disappear to?" she demanded. "Whatever happened to that god-awful nuisance who badgered and berated everyone?" Tears welled up in Miss Boston's eyes. "Stop snivelling," the spectre snapped. "Why aren't you trying to conquer your disabilities?" The old lady blinked the tears away. "Come on, Alice," Mrs. Joyster barked. Using all her concentration, Miss Boston tried to move her right arm. The withered limb twitched as it gingerly rose, but after a few moments it flopped limply at her side again. "Well, if that's the best you can do, you might as well forget the whole thing. Oh, honestly, have that idiot doctor and that twittering bird-brain Edith really convinced you? Really? So what if they have told you to accept your fate? Throw their pills and lotions down the drain and use your own special talents. Remember who you are. Remember what you are. Use that knowledge now. Heal yourself." The white head shook in despair. Her condition was too severe for those humble ways. "Don't be ridiculous," Mrs. Joyster cried. "I don't expect you to do it all by yourself. Have you forgot that most precious thing Patricia Gunning entrusted to you?" Bewilderment passed over Miss Boston's face as she finally remembered the Book of Shadows. "There!" Prudence exclaimed. "Use the book. Make yourself strong again." Suddenly the spectre looked up sharply, as if she had heard something that alarmed her. "So soon," Prudence gasped. "But there is still much to tell. Oh, damn them! I feel his thought reaching out to us. Alice, there is great danger. Plans are being laid. Terrible, evil plans, Alice. You think that the nightmares are over. They are not. The worst terrors are yet to come. The rain beat more loudly upon the window, and Prudence, reaching out her ghostly hand, tried to clutch the gnarled arthritic mitten that was Miss Boston's. "Against the forces which are mounting," she cried, "there will be no salvation, no refuge. If you are not able to defend them, Janet and Ben will die." Outside the cottage, plant pots crashed to the ground, scattering their earth into the ferocious wind which hurled it against the window-panes. Prudence leaped backwards as an unseen force flung her across the room. "Don't give up, Alice!" she wailed. "Use the book, but above all, beware!" Then came the roaring sound of the sea. Prudence shrieked. From the fireplace came a blast of freezing, salty air, and with an agonizing scream, the ghost of Prudence Joyster crackled and vanished. Almost immediately the storm subsided, but Miss Boston trembled as she lifted her eyes to the dark windows, for pressed against the glass and obliterating the world outside was a solid wall of dripping seaweed. It was as if the ocean itself had tried to invade the cottage. Miss Boston shuddered, remembering Prudence's ominous words. Ben hurried along the shore. It had been several weeks since he had last visited the fisher folk, for Miss Weathers kept him indoors as much as possible. The boy had tried to explain about the fisher folk, but she would never understand. "How could there be creatures living in tunnels beneath the cliffs?" she had asked. "You shouldn't encourage him, Janet. I don't like him wandering on the beach alone. He's only 8. For countless years, the Aufwaders had dwelt in their vast warren below the town. Once there had been many different tribes, but their numbers had steadily dwindled. The ancient home of the fisher folk had been destroyed by Jarvis, and since then the tribe had been forced to seek shelter in shallow caves set in the east cliff. Now they were like refugees in their own land. Even Ben's friend Nelda had grown disheartened. Perhaps she, like many Aufwaders, had started to feel bitter towards mankind. It was with some trepidation, therefore, that he approached the towering cliffs. "Nelda!" Ben called. "It's me! Nelda!" Nothing stirred. Ben shuddered and almost fled, for in the fading light the cliffs seemed threatening. "Don't be silly," he told himself. "You're too old to be scared of the dark." The boy began to climb. The rain had made the way perilous, and it was not long before he wished he had never attempted the dangerous climb. Twice his fingers slid over the shale, and he pressed himself desperately to the rock. With an effort, he lifted his right foot and placed it into the next cleft. But when he put his weight upon it, he slipped. "Help!" he wailed as he fell backwards. "Up there comes!" bawled a gruff voice. A strong hand caught Ben's wrist. "What daftness be this? Where did they reckon they were heading?" Tar Shrimp, leader of the fisher folk and the grandfather of Nelda, hauled the boy to safety. "Thank you," Ben gasped. "I nearly—" "There mun be witless a-coming out on such a day. Get thee inside afore they catch the death." The cave was small, and hanging in great swathes from the rocky ceiling were many fishing nets. From these, 2 tiny lamps were hung. In the middle a pathetic fire was burning. Sitting before the miserable flames was Nelda. So intense was her concentration, she did not hear them enter. Over her huddled frame the lamplight danced, rejoicing in her large sea-grey eyes and glowing in the soft curves of her lined, leathery face. Nelda's dark, tangled hair trailed over her shoulders. The youngest of the fisher folk was undoubtedly one of the fairest, yet she was also the unhappiest. In silence she brooded upon the deadly secret that she had not dared tell to anyone, that inside her the unborn child of Esau was growing.
"Stir this hen, lass," barked Tar. "Us have got a visitor."
Nelda hastily wiped her eyes and turned around. "Hello," Ben said. "Thought I'd come and see how you are." Nelda managed a faint smile. "It is good to see you again," she said. "Come, sit by me." Tar settled himself upon a stool and took up his pipe.
"Reet fain am to see thee," he remarked to Ben. "Our Nelda's been no company. Now in a month she's been a-moping with her face a-dragging on floor."
Nelda stared sullenly at the fire. Ben felt horribly uncomfortable. He had obviously walked in upon some family squabble. "How are the rest of the tribe?" he asked.
"Most of 'em found a way into th' old covens," Tar said.
"I thought all those were destroyed," Ben cried.
"Aye, but the main entrance chamber is still there, behind the girt doors which are sealed forever, and a new way were dove to enter it. Them sits in that one place, crowded together like scared sheep. How's the aunt faring?"
"Aunt Alice is just as poorly as she was before. I don't think she will ever get better."
"Much does we owe that aunt of thine," Tar said sombrely. "So long as the tribe lasts, her name will be honoured."
"What of your sister, Ben?" Nelda asked. Ben shrugged. "I don't know what's got into Jen. She just isn't any fun these days."
"None of us are the same as we used to be," Nelda muttered grimly. "You and I are alike. We are orphans. Yet at least you know the manner of your mother's end. It is best to know all, not be left to conjure up demons in the mind to feed on ignorance and fear." Her grandfather slammed his staff upon the floor. "Enough! I've told thee many times I shall not speak of that time, never."
"How did my mother die?"
Nelda shrieked.
"Tell me!"
"No!" he yelled. "Never!"
I think I'd best go home now," Ben uttered quietly.
"Remember me to the aunt," Tar said curtly.
"I will, Mr. Shrimp. Goodbye." Nelda sprang to her feet. "Wait, I will walk with you." Once on the shore, Nelda breathed deeply. "What was that all about?" Ben ventured.
"My grandfather thinks of me as a bairn," she said.
"He is very old," said the boy. "And in the eyes of your kind, you are practically the same age as me, even though you are 70.
"Perhaps," she muttered. "Yet I was considered age enough to wed with Esau Grendel."
"Only because none of the others dared oppose him. Nelda, just tell me. I know you want to."
Nelda raised her eyes. "My troubles are now 4 months old," she began. "You recall the nature of my late spouse?" Ben shuddered. "Just so," she sorrowfully agreed. "Yet from him I did buy the knowledge of the third guardian, and brought it safe from the clutches of the Malikin." Nelda's tears mingled with the rain, as finally she prepared to blurt out the awful secret which terrified her.
"No one knows the heinous price that accursed Esau placed upon that knowledge, nor do they suspect I was fool enough to pay it. But what else could I have done?" "What did you do?" the boy asked, a horrible suspicion beginning to form in his mind.
"Blather, blather, blather,"
snapped a sharp voice from the shadows.
"What's that scrawn whelp squawking for now?"
From the gloom, a small round figure emerged. Old Parry narrowed her sly eyes and wrinkled her spiteful face up at Ben. She hated all humans, but despised him especially because he had the favour of the lords of the deep. She was the most vindictive and downright nasty member of the Aufwader tribe. Nelda dried her eyes. The last thing she wanted was for the creature to go spreading tales among the rest of the tribe.
"Consorting with the land breed again?"
old Parry observed through tight lips.
"No wonder you blubber. But I've a mind to go pool wading this night, and I'll not be disturbed by your screeching."
Nelda thought of a good many things to say to the interfering old nuisance. Then she had a different idea, and her angry face became wrapped in smiles. "Oh!" she exclaimed. "It's been such a long time since I foraged in the pools. May I join you?"
"You?"
uttered old Parry in complete surprise.
"Wade with me?"
"I should love to." The astonished female shrugged, then glanced back at Ben.
"But no stinking land breed."
Guiltily, Nelda looked across at the boy. "Is it not time for you to return? I shall see you soon, no doubt." Rejected and miserable, Ben made for the town. Feeling worse than ever, Nelda watched him leave.
"Thought you'd tire of human company,"
old Parry said.
"'Tain't proper for us to mingle. Look what happened to Una."
"Yes," breathed Nelda. "It was she who brought the wrath of the Deep Ones upon us by wedding one of the land breed."
"And sealed our fate with the laying of the mother's curse,"
added old Parry.
"A fouler end them lords of the deep could not have devised."
What exactly happens under the curse?"
"Death, of course."
"Yes, but how exactly? I want to know what happened to my mother."
"'Ta not told you?" "Nah, you wouldn't. But I was there. I know."
Old Parry's eyes glinted.
"'Tain't no pretty tale," she muttered. "But I can see there's no denying you. Sit here."
Stiffly, Nelda sat upon the cold, wet stone beside her, and the crone chuckled horribly.
"Your mother was a headstrong, foolish creature, tried to give her husband a child. Not many centuries had an infant been born to our kind, not one that lived, that is. Strong was the bond twixt she and your father, and for his sake she bore you. But as time went by and her belly swelled, her agonies increased. Every time the moon waxed and was full, he could hear her screams rent the night and echo through every tunnel and chamber. Now, few wives survive beyond the first 3 months, so when she lingers on past the 8th, with only 4 more remaining, we all wondered if the curse had lost some of its power. But the lords of the deep and dark showed their displeasure. Shoals of rotting fish were washed ashore, and storms raged at sea so that no boats could set sail for many weeks. 'Twas an evil time, and your mother was to blame. When her time came, it was beyond aught I had yet seen. As soon as you were born, she began to die."
"How?"
"By the most evil of means. Such is the foul manner of the curse that the very blood in her veins turned to brine."
"No!" Nelda gasped, stricken with horror. "It cannot be true."
"On my Joby's watery grave," the other swore. "The salt water creeping through her body, burning and blistering through her flesh. An agony of madness was hers, and not even her own husband's father did she know. Yet for nigh on 2 whole weeks did your mother linger, and by the end she was like a salted slug. No black boat carried her into the sea. There was not raining, only a briny sludge with Abe weeping over it."
Nelda staggered to her feet. It was worse than she had dreaded.
"Don't go,"
old Parry sniggered.
"Let me tell you of others that perished, and of the countless bairns that did not survive."
The crone's brutal laughter echoed over the shore, rebounding off the cliffs, as if they too mocked the poor Aufwader girl. Janet Lawrenson was a pretty 12-year-old with dark brown hair and a pleasant oval face. But since she had come under the influence of Nathaniel Crozier, she had seemed old before her time, and withdrew into herself a little further every day. Glumly, Janet walked along Church Street towards Aunt Alice's cottage. At last, the rain had eased. Just as she was about to turn into the alleyway that led to the cottage, she saw Ben trudging along from the direction of the shore.
"How was Nelda?"
she asked. Ben made no reply, but crossed the courtyard, leapt up the doorstep, and knocked loudly. At once the door was torn open, and a woman in her 50s, with greying hair that looked as though it had been sat on, was framed in the doorway.
"Oh, where the pair of you been?" she twittered. "Look at the state of your clothes, Ben. Oh, dear!"
The boy sniffed expectantly.
"Was for tea?"
he asked.
"Oh, dear!" Miss Weathers exclaimed again. "I clean forgot."
And she threw an agitated glance at the door of the sick room.
"What's the matter?"
Janet asked.
"Aunt Alice, has something happened to her?"
Miss Weathers flapped her hands as the girl made for the sick room, and only just managed to pull her back in time.
"You can't go in there yet," she told her. "Not until the doctor's finished."
Ben's stomach turned over. What if the old lady had died?
"Alice is fine,"
Edith hastily explained.
"She got a little agitated this afternoon, that's all. I had only popped upstairs for a little lie-down when suddenly the storm awoke me and I heard a crash from downstairs. When I entered the sick room I found Alice sprawled on the floor. The silly old thing had tried to stand. Can you imagine? Oh, it was awful. And do you know what else? Sand. Everywhere there was sand. How do you account for that? Sure, I don't know. And covering the windows was a heap of seaweed. It was like one of those uncanny events you read about, when it rains frogs or sardines. Took a long time to be rid of it, too. Anyway, there Alice was, sprawled."
Her report complete, Edith gulped the air exhaustedly, then added in a respectful whisper,
"Of course, I ran to telephone Dr. Adams immediately. He's just finishing his examination."
Within the sick room, Dr. Adams shook his head at the patient.
"You are nothing but a stubborn old nuisance," he told her. "Getting up, indeed."
Dr. Adams was a tall pink man with thinning hair slicked down by generous applications of pomade. Miss Boston stared at him, and if looks could maim, then he would have been the one in need of medical attention. She was now lying in bed with the pillows properly fluffed up by Edith, and her coverlet neatly tucked in all around.
"You should be thankful there's no damage done," the doctor concluded. "Old bones are very fragile, you know."
Giving Miss Boston a final disapproving look, he went to the door and told Edith that he had finished. At once, Janet and Ben pushed past him and put their arms about Aunt Alice's neck.
"Careful,"
the doctor scolded.
"She's an invalid, remember. Don't excite her." "Is there anything more I should be doing for her?"
Miss Weathers squeaked. Dr. Adams gave her a pleased smile.
"I wish all my patients were so well tended to," he praised her. "Alice Boston should count herself lucky to have such a good friend. If she were a little less selfish and reconciled herself to her infirmities, she mightn't put you under this unnecessary strain."
On the bed, Miss Boston snorted, but Edith blushed and nervously rushed into the kitchen to make the doctor a cup of tea.
"Now then," he said to the children, "remember what I said. No excitement for her."
And with that he followed the flustered ex-postmistress from the room. As soon as she was rid of him, Miss Boston urgently tried to speak to Janet and Ben, but all that issued from her paralysed mouth was a series of incoherent grunts. The old lady's head flopped against the pillows, and tears of frustration sprang from her eyes.
"Perhaps if you pointed at something," Ben suggested, "we could work it out from there, a bit like charades."
Miss Boston's face brightened at once, and again she summoned her feeble strength. Her right arm twitched, and for a brief second she managed to indicate the row of books in the alcove.
"One of these?"
Janet began to read what was written on the spines.
"Greek legends and other myths, translations from the Celtic manuscripts, Is Anybody There, Passion on the High Seas, That's one of Miss Weathers's. I can't read this one, it's too tatty. The next is Legacy of the Witches. Angelic... Jen! Ben called. Stop! Miss Boston was tapping her hand upon the bedclothes and nodding her head frantically. It was that scrappy one she wanted. Janet eased the volume from the shelf, and several loose pages fluttered to the floor. Picking them up, she handed the untidy sheaf to the old lady, who spread her arthritic fingers over the cover and gave a grateful sigh. Here it was, the most precious thing in a witch's possession, the Book of Shadows. Patricia Gunning had entrusted it to Miss Boston with her dying breath, but since her return to Whitby she had not given it a single thought. Now the old lady's hand trembled with excitement. If this really did hold the key to her recovery, then Patricia, one of the most respected white witches in the country, had been more powerful than she had ever suspected. Later that night, Ben crawled into bed and stared thoughtfully at the sloping ceiling. What was bothering Nelda? He murmured to himself. And why did she want to talk to that awful Parry? The boy yawned, then rolled over and reached across to the chest of drawers, where he picked up a small piece of stone. The ammonite that Ben had found in the first week of his time in Whitby had become one of his favourite possessions. To him, it symbolized a permanent thing in a world that was always changing. Some nights, when he felt especially vulnerable, he would go to sleep with the fossil grasped in his hand. Tonight was one of those occasions. Ben traced the snake-like spiral pattern of the ammonite with his fingers to reassure himself. As the night deepened, the mouth of the River Esk was calm and still. The water of the harbour was dark, black as jet. Yet beneath the waves something far blacker was moving. Between the two piers that stretched far into the sea, a rush of bubbles suddenly shattered the smooth face of the tide. Waves began to foam, as from the deep something surged, passing beneath the shadows of the lighthouses towards the distant town, until it came to a seething halt by the harbour wall. Above the rippling waves, a black shape rose, and the air darkened around it as shadows gathered to conceal what the sea had sent forth. From the river, the creature climbed. It was a formless horror like an immense and tarry amoeba that extended a thick snaking arm to heave itself up the steps. With a vile squelching sound it slowly moved through the narrow cobbled streets, and where the great flabby bulk passed, a stinking path of slime was left in its wake. Towards Miss Boston's cottage it went, and clinging to the mortar, the bloated nightmare began to crawl upwards. Pulling itself to the upper window, the slimy horror spread out 2 strands of dank flesh and gripped the sill firmly. Within the bedroom, Ben muttered in his sleep and rolled over, kicking the blankets from him. The hideous shape pushed itself onto the window pane. Flattened against the glass, frills of pale flesh parted, and 2 clusters of eyes pushed forward to spy into the room. Glittering balefully, the fragmented eyes peered long at the sleeping boy, and in the swirling fronds of slime a ghastly mouth fell open. 3 tentacles stretched from the damp, glistening skin, and their sensitive, squirming tips began to feel all around the window, tapping and groping for a way in. Trapped in a gruesome dream, Ben whimpered. With an unhappy groan he turned onto his back, flinging his arm over the edge of the bed, and one by one his fingers fell open. Onto the carpet rolled the ammonite, and from the vileness that clung to the window ledge like some hellish fleshy spider, There came a gurgling and a contented sigh. Brandishing a large umbrella high above her head so that it afforded little protection from the inclement weather, Sister Frances marched over the swing bridge as though she were charging into battle. In her other hand she gripped the handles of a capacious brown shopping bag. The nun enjoyed the feel of the raindrops plopping onto her upturned face, and would often hold her mouth open to try and catch them. Into the centre of every puddle she stamped her enormous feet, smiling broadly to herself with each satisfying splash. She was a bizarre figure. Of all the nuns in the convent of the West Cliff, Sister Frances was undoubtedly the most unusual. Attached to those great gauche feet were a pair of long, stalk-like legs, and from the collar of her habit her neck stretched up to a long, gawky head. She was in her early 40s, and there was no one in Whitby who had not been made aware of her. When she galumphed by, the sight of her brought smiles to many, but to others the merest glimpse could bring only dread. It wasn't as if she was a bad person, no one could be sweeter, but Sister Frances utterly exhausted people. Everything the nun ever did stemmed solely from her willingness to give aid where she thought it was needed. Yet in spite of her intrepid endeavours, she never accomplished anything, and blustered through life oblivious to the mayhem that erupted around her. Sister Frances marched up to one of the cottages and pressed the bell. With a honk of mirth, she kept her finger jammed firmly on the button. The front door was flung open, and a jangled Edith Weathers peeped crossly out at her.
"Couldn't resist,"
the nun explained.
"Well, it's another Thursday, and here I am. How's the poorly invalid?"
"Not herself, I'm afraid. You'd best go and sit with her. Alice has been acting most oddly since her fall, and keeps poring over a fusty old book which I've a good mind to throw in the dustbin."
"Don't you worry,"
the nun assured her.
"I'll bring the colour back into her cheeks."
"I'm sure you will," Miss Weathers whispered to herself as she opened the door of the sick-room. Mr. Gregson, the next-door neighbour, had already been in to carry Miss Boston from the bed and place her in the armchair. Usually the old lady would sit there lamenting her condition and wait for the hours to roll slowly by. Not so today. Alice Boston was busier than she had been for months. During the past week she had marvelled at the Book of Shadows, and the tantalizing things she had read there inspired and filled her heart with hope. Unfortunately, Miss Boston had only managed to read brief extracts, for Edith Weathers was continually interrupting her. Sometimes the book would be whisked from her lap and a cup of tepid milk plied to her lips. One of the most infuriating acts of sabotage practised by the Weathers' enemy was to switch off the bedside lamp without warning. This nauseating act had left the invalid in the dark on 2 occasions now, and it was driving her to despair. Yet Miss Boston had read just enough to learn by heart an obscure rhyming chant, and had lain awake the whole of the previous night, speaking those esoteric words in her thoughts. Over and over in her mind she repeated the spell, calling on whatever powers were still left to her. Sister Frances peeped closely at the frail figure in the chair.
"I say,"
she addressed Miss Weathers,
"I believe she's dropped off. Shall I be as quiet as a wee mousie and tippy-toe to the other chair until she wakes?"
Edith scrutinized her sick friend with critical eyes.
"She's not asleep," she commented, "just pretending. Mother used to do that too." "Well, then," exclaimed the nun, "we can't have that, can we? I brought my dolly cheer-up bag, especially to buck the poorly patient out of those dreary doldrums."
Miss Boston continued to show no sign that she was aware of them. Edith took her overcoat from the stand and slipped it on.
"Most aggravating," she commented. "Been like that all morning. You've no call to be stubborn, Alice. Dr. Adams won't be pleased, will he?"
Fishing a plastic rain-hood from her pocket, she tied it neatly over the grey haystack of her hair and said to the nun,
"Just pop into the shops, won't be long." "You shop away,"
Sister Frances told her.
We'll have such a spiffy time, won't we, Miss B?"
Edith gave the old lady one final dithering look, then flitted out of the door. Sister Frances paced toward Miss Boston.
"Come, come,"
she called, stooping over the armchair.
"Time to open those eyes. There's sleep enough in the grave, as my dear papa used to say."
Miss Boston did not stir, so the nun put out a hand and patted her on the head. At once the eyes snapped open, and Miss Boston's concentration was completely shattered.
"Oh, what a grumpy face!"
laughed Sister Frances, sitting upon the other chair.
"I can see I've got my work cut out for me this morning. Now then, what lovely things can we do today? Shall I peep inside the jolly cheer-up bag and see what rays of sunshine we can find? Here I go, then."
As this was not the first time Miss Boston had been visited by the nun, the old lady knew exactly what rays of sunshine the wretched bag contained, and loathed each and every one of them. Out came the home-made glove puppets, but thankfully the stitching in one of the heads had started to unravel, so the nun put them to one side. Then appeared a game of tiddlywinks, but one glance at Miss Boston's arthritic hands made Sister Frances go rooting for something else.
"Here we are," she announced. "A lovely jigsaw. I'll get a tray and pull my chair next to yours, then you can watch me fit the pieces. What fun! Such a divine picky of ducklings on a pond with a dainty bridge spanning—"
Sister Frances looked at the poorly patient and faltered. The old lady's countenance was so terrible that it quelled that idea, but not Sister Frances's unbridled enthusiasm.
"If you don't feel up to the quacky little ducklings," she rallied, "I know what we can do."
Out came a magazine.
"Can you guess what I'm going to do?" she piped up. "That's right, I'll read it to you. Just relax and enjoy."
As the nun turned the first page, after reading aloud the title of the magazine and what delights lay in store, Miss Boston felt that she could bear no more. Quivering with impotent fury, Miss Boston's hands clenched into fists, and her face turned purple.
"How I grouted my kitchen tiles in one afternoon,"
the dreadful creature read with a light-hearted lilt in her voice. Miss Boston could feel the blood vessels thump and pound in her forehead. She shook all over, and her one good hand gripped the chair-arm so tightly that her knuckles turned white. Her breath snorted down her nostrils like that of a horse, and she opened her mouth.
3 mouth-watering ways to use red cabbage to inflame your salads and make others green with envy."
That was it. In a voice that had not been heard for 3 whole months, and with a trumpeting shout so loud that the windows trembled, Miss Boston roared,
"Get out! Get out of my sight! You stupid imbecile!"
Sister Frances dropped the magazine and stared incredulously at the old lady. You spoke!" she exclaimed.
"Oh, how fabulous!"
Night stole over the town, and in the clear heavens the stars shone coldly. Below the cliffs, between the black rocks, 2 small figures slowly clambered. "Very air bites tonight," Nelda said with a shudder. "Will you tell me now? Why did you wake me and draw me from my warm bed? What is it that you know? You creep into our quarters and tell me not to wake my grandfather."
"This ain't no business of menfolk,"
Parry spat.
"Some secrets women keep to ourselves."
Coming to a ring of craggy stone that was filled with sea-water, old Parry made herself comfortable and told Nelda to do the same. "Are you set on pool-wading this night?" the girl cried.
"No, child,"
the other answered mysteriously.
"It is not shells I look for, not this time."
There was a strange edge to Parry's voice, and Nelda sat, wondering what the spiteful creature was up to. "What do you want?" A low cackle issued from the crabbed lips.
"Oh, why, child," old Parry murmured, "to be a mother to you. Now hear me out. Have you never heard of scrying the waters?"
Nelda nodded warily. "Yes," she answered. Parry chuckled.
"By rights, 'tis the mother's task to pay for her daughter's fortunes, but I'm willing to undertake it. I have watched you since the hour of your birth and have no offspring of mine own. Would you permit?"
The young aufwader had no reason to trust her, but what harm could it do? She had often heard the barren sea wives talk of the dark nights when they had been led to a rock pool by their mothers. When they spoke of it, they would weep and lament in knowledge that they would never have any children to gaze into the water for. "Very well," she agreed. "Look into my future. Will I be a bride again?" Parry tutted at her mockery.
"No game to a play," she muttered. "The frolics of gazing nights were founded in ancient tradition. In every tribe there was one who could really part the curtain of time and look beyond tomorrow."
"And you are one of those?" Nelda asked, not believing a word. The other took from around her neck an egg-shaped pebble threaded onto a piece of string.
"No, but this bauble did belong to one, and sometimes, if it allows, I can see days yet distant. Now be still."
Twirling the string in her fingers, she held it over the rock pool and slowly lowered the stone into the inky water.
"There now,"
the crone gurgled.
"Remember thy mistress. 'Tis I, Idin. Thou knowest me, my pretty stone. Awake and let out thy knowledge."
The disturbed water remained dark to Nelda's eyes, but old Parry peered keenly into the shallow depths as she released the stone and let it sink to the bottom.
"Ah," she hissed. "I see yourself, Nelda. A cloud of darkness and despair is closing around you, and ever your voice is raised in cries of pain and woe."
Slyly, her eyes slid round to look at the young aufwader, and she knew she had guessed correctly. Nelda grabbed a large pebble and flung it into the centre of the rock pool. The water exploded into Parry's face, and the wicked hag fell backwards, coughing and spluttering.
"Harridan!" the girl yelled. "Why taunt me?"
Parry gloated maliciously.
"'Tis true, then," she wheezed. "A bairn is growing inside your belly. Ha! Into agonies undreamed of will you be plunged. All them sea wives are dying with them infants inside them. None would listen to me, not even your mother. Oh, no, not her. Only the clever ones survived. Only those who hearkened to me saved themselves. Come."
She scrambled to her feet and hurried over the rocks towards the town.
"If you want to live to see another winter, you'd best be with me."
Nelda did not trust her, but found herself following. Through the streets they went until they came to the foot of the abbey steps. Immediately Parry hastened upwards, her eyes darting to and fro in case they should meet one of the infernal land breed. But the 199 steps were deserted. When she reached the summit, Parry sat upon a tombstone and waited for Nelda to catch up. She took a leather purse out of her pocket, and from this she carefully removed a small disc of sea-polished green glass and held it to one of her eyes. Nelda appeared puffing and panting, and had to rest before she could speak. "What is that?" she asked then, pointing to the circle of glass.
"Aha! Now this truly is a useful trinket, and is all mine. I found it. I used it. Did Tar ever tell you what I did before we were doomed? I was the midwife. Into this sorry world did I deliver the infants, and then Una disgraced us, and yet brides still loved their husbands, and life was made, so a new task was I needed for."
Leaving the tombstone, she passed further into the graveyard. The lamps that illuminated the church were dark, and the top of the exposed cliff was forbidding, cloaked in watchful shadows. Nelda could imagine all sorts of terrors lurking in the long grass that swayed and rustled in the wind.
Many strange beings had dwelt in Whitby through the ages, dangerous wild creatures with razor teeth and murderous hearts. Into the engulfing black shade of the church they plunged. Old Parry observed Nelda's disquiet and bared her brown teeth in a repulsive grin. Then she held up the glass disc and tittered.
13 times has this been steeped in the reflection of the full moon, she explained. Once for every month that we carry the unborn within us. Forbidden words have I spoken over this shiny glass, and with it are spared many of our tribe from their agonies.
I don't understand, Nelda breathed. What does it do? Parry lifted the disc to her eye again.
'Tis a boon to sight, she answered. Beneath the moon some things grow which it is better we do not see, yet at certain times in certain places there is a plant, the bitterest little herb which only the glass can disclose. It is the moon's gift to us, her merciful balm sprung from the tears of her compassion at our plight.
With that she began hunting between the headstones, questing the gloom like a hound after a scent. Then, emitting a crow of delight, she called to Nelda, and with a bony finger pointed at the shadowy ground. They were standing beside a grave that was smaller than the others, and Nelda felt her skin crawl in revulsion.
"Behold!" Parry cried. "Peer through this child and see your salvation."
With shaking hands, Nelda took the lens from her and put it to her eye. At first there was only a green darkness, and then she drew her breath in sharply. Growing from the centre of the grave was a small, sickly-looking plant. Nelda lowered the glass and stared again, but she could see no trace of the ugly weed.
"The moonlight blinds your eyes to it,"
Parry whispered in her ear.
"Not for all is the fruit of her pity."
Nelda gazed through the lens a second time and studied the weed more closely. It was a vile and repugnant growth, the colour of putrefying death and decay. Suddenly Nelda covered her nose and mouth. From the flower a nauseating reek was rising. "What vileness of nature is it?" she gasped. "What horror have you shown me this night?" The crone cackled.
"This bitter weed is your friend. Simply taste one drop of the plant's juice and the life-leeching infant will be cast away, and you shall live."
"What are you saying?" Nelda cried aghast. "Stop! I shall hear no more."
"Be not too hasty,"
the crone told her.
"Do you want to die in torment, devoured by the salt which will blister through your veins?"
With a quivering hand, Nelda reached down. The flower swayed, and its stamens whipped around and brushed against her hand.
"No!"
she shrieked, desperately wiping her stinging fist on the wet grass. I cannot kill the life which is inside me. Get away! Let me pass!" With tears streaking down her face, she staggered through the churchyard, sobbing in despair. Behind her, old Parry shouted,
"Fool! What will the tribe think when I tell them of the danger you bear? Does Tar know? I shall tell him you should have been rid of the bear, and I'll not help again."
The hag spat on the ground. Then a smile every bit as repulsive as the weed disfigured her face. Nelda was still in possession of the lens. Throwing back her head, she let loose a horrible laugh.
"Better make use of the glass soon,"
she screeched.
"Before it's too late."
Miss Boston grew steadily stronger. Consulting the Book of Shadows, she directed Edith Weathers in the application of ointments and poultices to her withered limbs, and kept to a diet of her own devising. Sometimes the old lady burned an exquisitely fragrant incense, which she inhaled in gulps. Miss Boston would wake just before the dawn and sing an incantation until the first rays of the sun stole into her room. Then she would invoke the forces of life and spend the rest of the day in deep study or performing what exercises her fragile strength allowed. Focusing her attention only on getting well, Miss Boston paid no heed to the other business of the town. The little bookshop was sold, and the townsfolk found the new proprietor downright rude. Along Pier Road, another cafe opened which served excellent cream teas, and one of the curio shops was taken over by a woman whom Edith described as exotic-looking. None of this news aroused even the slightest curiosity in Miss Boston, and on a rare fine March afternoon she was sitting in her garden. For 3 whole hours the invalid had occupied herself with coordination exercises, and now she was exhausted. Sitting in her wheelchair, the old lady struggled to breathe. It was a gorgeous day. Spring had come early. Heedless of season, every flower had opened, and blown on the lightest of breezes, fragrance wrapped itself around her. Through watering eyes, the old lady saw the colours become more intense than ever. Even the grass shone like one enormous emerald. The struggle to keep awake was too much, and Miss Boston's head lolled to one side. A happy, gurgling laugh sounded in the garden. At once Miss Boston was awake, and she stared at the figure in astonishment. The boy could not have been more than 4 years old. His face was crowned with a tangle of golden hair, and above the chubby cheeks his eyes shone as blue as the fierce sky. Miss Boston gasped in delight. With his merry, twinkling eyes fixed upon her, the small boy took a step forward. He was dressed in an old-fashioned nightgown made of a white gossamer material that flowed like smoke. In an infinitely reassuring voice he said, "Will you come with me?" A perfect peace settled upon her soul. "Yes," she answered, "I'll come." The sunlight glimmered in the boy's hair as his fingertips reached for her own, and the sunshine bathed both of them in a wonderful glow. "Aunt Alice!" shrieked a voice. Into the garden charged Ben, and the golden-haired infant drew back. "Keep away!" Ben cried, guessing what the visitor had come for. "Her time is done," the cherub replied, disconcerted that the mortal could see him. "I must take her." "I will not let you!" Ben shouted furiously. "Go back!" Whimpering forlornly, the divine figure faded and was no more. Immediately Ben threw his arms about Miss Boston's neck. She was in a deep, deep sleep, and he had to shake her before she stirred. "Oh, Benjamin," she breathed. "I was having such a lovely dream. I can't for the life of me recall what it was about. What is it you want, dear?" The boy grinned. "Just to tell you that I'm back from school," he answered, and hugged her tightly. In April, Janet's 13th birthday arrived. To her dismay, she learnt that a small celebration had been planned. "Bring all of your chums round," Aunt Alice called after her as Janet left for school. "The more the merrier." But Janet had no friends to ask. Outside the new curio shop, the girl paused. Longingly she contemplated the fascinating objects made of local jetstone. Within the shop, a dark-eyed, exotic-looking woman with short black hair viewed the girl over the rim of her spectacles. "So," Hillian Fogel, new owner of the curio shop, uttered with a faint and husky accent, "it is she." Later that morning the woman stepped from the shop, locking it behind her. Everything about her denoted her extravagant taste and style, from the immaculate makeup down to the handmade Italian shoes. Briskly, Hillian opened the door of the Whitby bookshop. The woman behind the till, Miriam Gower, was built like a shot-putter. She was always attired in the most feminine clothes she could find, and was wearing a printed cotton dress covered in pale pink roses. Her thinning hair had been dyed a dusky shade of orange. When Hillian entered, she was occupied in painting her nails the same garish crimson as her lips, so that it seemed she had dipped her fingers in fresh blood, then drunk the rest. Hillian nodded at the other customers. Miriam rose majestically, and within 10 minutes the customers stumbled out into the street, clutching unwanted purchases pressed on them by Miriam. Locking the door behind them, Miriam turned to Hillian.
"Have you any news?"
"Indeed, yes. The contact shall be tonight. Then we will receive our instructions."
"Praise be. Each day is a torment without him. When shall we meet? Make it here, tonight?"
The other woman agreed. "It shall be so, but I must also be informing Susanna."
"Tell plain little Susie?" Miriam scoffed. "Is there any point? I fear our own darling Quasimodo is lapsing."
"She will do exactly what she is bid," Hillian said firmly, "as will us all." When Janet returned to the cottage that afternoon, she found the parlour table laden with a sumptuous spread. Miss Boston clucked excitedly.
"I put the sausages on the sticks myself," she proudly declared, "and cut up the cheese into cubes. Well, what do you think?"
It looks lovely," Janet managed.
"Your friends, are they here?"
"No," Janet said firmly. "I haven't brought anyone."
"Is there something wrong?" Miss Boston asked gently. "You used to tell me everything. Nothing's changed, has it?"
"Only me," the girl replied. Then, taking a deep breath, she began. "Tell me, is it possible to hate something, or someone, so much yet still—" Abruptly the doorbell rang in intermittent bursts, and Miss Boston groaned.
"Confound Sister Francis," she snorted. "I shall be glad when I'm fit again, if only to be able to run from that blethering nuisance."
"Many happy returns!" Sister Francis shouted as she burst into the parlour, swooped upon the table, and carried off a handful of food which she rapidly made short work of. Ben raced in and piled sandwiches onto a plate. In silence, Janet picked at her food and watched the others. It was as though she no longer belonged amongst this cheerful group.
"Is that orange squash I spy?" Sister Francis enthused. "Might I partake of a smidgen?"
Aunt Alice picked up an empty glass, and then, as an idea struck her, a mischievous chuckle issued from her lips.
"Let me fill it for you, sister,"
she said, and turned away to do so. Miss Weathers finished her work on the birthday cake and nipped in for a bite to eat.
"Some more squash, sister?"
Miss Boston beamed.
"Rather!"
Edith scurried back into the kitchen. When she returned, her face was aglow with the flames of 13 candles that crowned the cake she had laboured over. A loud chorus of happy birthday erupted, but the exuberant voice of Sister Francis drowned out all others, and when she had finished, the nun gave out a great giggling laugh. Miss Weathers and Ben stared at her in astonishment, but Aunt Alice hid a guilty smirk. A knock at the door made Miss Weathers scamper into the hall.
"Dr. Adams!"
she announced in a shriek as she realized how dreadful she looked, covered in icing sugar. Hurriedly, she disappeared upstairs.
"Hello there, Doctor!" hailed Sister Francis. "Isn't this much marvellous?"
The nun's head was waggling on her long neck as though it was about to fall off. Dr. Adams was horrified. The woman was drunk.
"I think you would better sit down,"
he said sternly, removing the glass of orange from her grasp and giving the dregs a cautious sniff.
"How long has she been like this?"
he asked Miss Boston in a low whisper.
Aunt Alice answered, "Rolled up like this over half an hour ago."
An odd twinkle glimmered in her eyes.
"I'll make her a strong black coffee," the doctor said.
"No!"
Francis roared loftily. "It's time I was going anyways. Ta-ta, Bennykins! Happy birthday, Jenny! Goodbye, Doctor!" And she strode in a wavering line from the room and stumbled outside. Miss Weathers came skipping down the stairs attired in a new dress.
"Well, I'm ready," she said.
"Ready for what?" Aunt Alice asked. "There's an old-time dance on tonight," the doctor smiled, "and Edith has accepted my invitation."
"Oh, Dr. Adams,"
cooed Miss Weathers. "Conway," he said. In a matter of minutes they had left the cottage, and Miss Boston uttered a grateful sigh.
"Here, Ben, put this in the dustbin if you would be so kind."
From the blanket which covered her knees she brought out an empty bottle of vodka.
"Only had it in for when the late Mrs. Banbury Scott used to call round," she explained. "Oh, what sublime revenge for all those afternoons of torture by nun. Did you see the expression on old Adams?"
Ben pushed her back to her sick room, and laughing together they left Janet sitting alone. They had completely forgotten to give the girl her birthday presents. From the shallows at the foot of the cliffs, a massive column of black rock rose into the sky, like a tower that had been roughly hewn in the lost ages of the world. Hillian Fogel felt a chill tingle travel along her spine. Flinging out her arms, she cried, "Hearken to me!" and her voice tore the waiting peace into shreds. "Here have I come," Hillian called. "This is the meeting place of your devising. Show unto me that our efforts have not been in vain. In the name of him who has passed over and by the coven of the Black Sceptre, I summon you." Keeping her arms raised until they ached, she waited for an answering sign. The wind, swiftly growing stronger, blew from the blackness of the open sea, whipping the foam from the waves and driving them against the shore with increasing violence. "Yes!" Hillian roared. "Show me your mighty majesty! Reveal thy will!" From the furthest reaches of the sea the storm came thundering. Huge waves crashed against the column of rock, and Hillian's short black hair streamed flat against her skull as the tempest screamed about her. "Show me now!" she screeched. "Show me!" From the deep, seething waters, a spout of icy water exploded to the surface as a small, square object shot from the waves. Hillian watched it fly through the night in a perfect arc towards her, until with a tremendous thump it hit the beach directly in front of her. It was a wooden box no larger than a small suitcase, and Hillian snatched it up greedily. "I thank you," she cried. "Now we can begin to do thy bidding. No task shall we balk at, and there is nothing we will not commit." The sea roared about the towering rock, and with a final glance at the raging waters, the plump woman set off back to Whitby. On Pier Road, the Sandy Beach Cafe looked cheerful in its peppermint paint. Susanna O'Donnell surveyed the shining interior with undisguised pride. She was a plain, stunted-looking woman with a face that held no redeeming feature. Her eyes were small and positioned too far apart, and beneath these was more of a snout than a nose. A mass of wiry ginger hair framed this unlovely countenance. Early on in her life, Susanna had taken to walking with a stoop to try to go unnoticed in the world. This had resulted in an unpleasant curvature of the spine. Yet she possessed one of the most enchanting voices ever to have sung outside a nightingale's throat, and when her father died, she had become one of the wealthiest women in Ireland. Briskly she pulled the rubber gloves from her hands. "Come down, this is," she sang lightly. "Ah, but you'll love it, sure you do, and when were you so happy?" As she removed her overall, the woman did indeed recall such an occasion. "That was it," she lamented. "That first day when he came sailing into my life, all grin and blarney." Susanna became lost in a fair memory, that unforgettable day when the only man who had ever noticed her confessed his adoration.
From the moment she beheld those blazing eyes, she was lost, and had followed him half around the world, though he had proven faithless and cruel. "Nathaniel," her voice chimed softly. "Oh, my sweet, sweet love." For 6 years Susanna had been a member of the Crozier coven, and during those witching years the high priest had squandered her fortune. But Nathaniel let her stay by him, and that was all she craved. Quickly she left the premises, and hunched over more than ever, walked along the quayside. Inside the Whitby bookshop, Hillian Fogel proudly showed Miriam and Susanna the wooden chest that the sea had given to her. It was made of black wood, carved with images of the deep oceans, and bound around by 2 wide bands of rusting iron. "Open it," Miriam urged, "quickly." Hillian carefully lifted the lid. The chest was filled with dry straw. Reaching in, Hillian emitted a delighted laugh.
"Look, Susanna, what a dainty we have been given!"
The red-haired woman looked at the thing which her coven sister held in her hands, and shivered. It was a horrible, mummified creature, part fish, part monkey. Miriam stroked the clumps of fur which still clung to the parchment dry flesh. "What a sweetheart," she murmured, blowing it kisses. Hillian put the creature on the carpet, then took from the box 3 small pouches, dark red cloth. "Incense," she commented. "And look, there is a bronze dish to burn it in." Hillian closed the box and lifted the mummified creature onto the lid. Then she placed the burner on the carpet in front and lit the powder with a match. The fine stream of smoke rose upwards until it reached a point just above the fish-monkey's head, and then the acrid fog curled down and began to flow over the shriveled form. As they watched, a rasping gasp issued from the creature's mouth, whilst the smoke poured into its lungs, and then the papery eyelids snapped open, and 2 yellow eyes shone in the candlelight. The hideous head twisted upon the scrawny neck, and the wrinkled mouth fell open. A vicious cluster of needle-like teeth was revealed to them.
"I am the mouthpiece of the all-powerful,"
came the chilling declaration.
"He does consent to bestow upon you your dearest longing."
Cries of joy issued from the witches, and even Susanna forgot her fear of the disgusting apparition.
"Through this animated vessel alone," it continued, "the Master can give you aid. Spies are all about, and secrecy is all. Should you fail to complete your part of the bargain, then your dreams shall be lost."
"The coven has never failed," Miriam assured it. "Tell us what task your master asks us to perform."
"Asks!"
the fish-monkey shrieked.
"The all-powerful does not ask, he demands. There is in this town one who has the strength to destroy us all should he be permitted to live. The mortal wretch has touched the treasure of the deep kingdoms, and thus the old laws now protect the loathsome worm. No power of the world can be seen to cause hurt to that insect, and so is my master foiled."
"Then we are to be his agents in this," stated Hillian. "It is no great matter for us. We have killed before." "Many times," mumbled Susanna. "Honor me with this glorious mission," Miriam begged. "Let me be the one who brings death to the upstart. I find poison most agreeable, a slow, lingering agony, or a quick and sudden end that cuts the thread of life in a moment."
"A poisoner!"
the creature snapped impatiently.
"Is that the scope of thy petty mind? There is a much simpler method, for the way has been chosen, and the hand of no one shall be in suspicion in the grey light of day."
"What must we do?"
asked Hillian.
First, join your hands and concentrate your powers. Summon what strength you possess. Let the essence of night flow through you.
It gave a shrill call, then raised its emaciated arms and began to mutter a string of evil-sounding words. Susanna held grimly onto the hands of her coven sisters as the cold, chanting voice filled her mind. She knew that terrible forces were gathering. The atmosphere became thick with unleashed enchantment as the invocations increased until the high, wailing voice of the fish-monkey reverberated through the very bricks of the building, and the shelves trembled before the mounting might. The witches gasped as each felt the breath rush from their bodies, and jagged forks of shadowy fire flashed about their wrists, burning into their hands until they cried out with pain. The fish-monkey was shouting the final words of the terrifying spell, and then it was over. Susanna felt as though she was floating, rising from the floor with her sisters up into the empty air. Keeping her eyes firmly shut, with her mind's eye she saw the wall drift towards them, and then it melted, dissolving like shimmering water. Out into the night the witches flew, soaring above the chimneys and riding the air like thistledown. Susanna marvelled at the sensation. But the flight did not last long, for soon they began to descend towards the grassy slope of the cliffside, to where a whitewashed cottage nestled in the shadows. They descended unerringly to a darkened window that peeped out beneath the eaves. The glass rippled before them, and they passed through the window as though it were a sheet of smoke. The voice of the fish-monkey resounded in their heads.
Behold, the human worm, the insolent whelp who dares to challenge the sovereignty of our great master.
Susanna and the others stole towards the bed. Beneath the blankets a small figure slept soundly, and Susanna's mouth fell open in horror. The sleeper was a child. Staring, she shook her head mutinously. Beside her, her sisters looked down on Ben dispassionately. The child was nothing to them. If he had to die, then so be it. Their hands were already steeped in the blood of many others.
This scrap of bones and blood,
the contemptuous voice continued,
is all that stands betwixt your heart's desire and the high plans of our most noble lord. Look to his left hand.
Even as the witches peered at the curled fingers, they heard the chilling voice begin to chant once more. Ben rolled over, his face moving into the dim light that streamed through the curtain. Susanna wept with pity. The boy's fist opened. In the centre of his palm was the round shape of the ammonite. Susanna began to shake in terror, for as she watched, the fossil began to move. Like a loathsome worm, it pulled itself along the open palm, crawling over Ben's wrist and up his arm. Miriam licked her teeth, feasting upon the macabre agony that was to come. Over Ben's throat the stone shape squirmed and reared up to cling to his chin. For a moment it dangled there like a leech. Then with a flick of its twisting tail, the fossil fell onto the boy's lips. Susanna tried to pull her hands away from the others. This was obscene. "Stop!" she protested. "It's vile!" But she could not break free. Malevolently, the ammonite wormed across the boy's mouth and pushed itself inside. In his sleep, the boy coughed. Deeper it squirmed, reaching further into his throat. Ben began to choke. The boy's body contorted as he gagged and gasped for air. His hands tore at the collar of his pyjamas, and his choking cries gargled piteously from his mouth. Miriam relished every despairing second. "Magnificent!"
she drawled. "Exquisite invention." At her side, Hillian watched with cold detachment. Never had she witnessed so beautifully simple a death. Ben's lungs were bursting and his heart thumped in his chest. But no air could pass by the ammonite, and the boy's strength gradually began to fail as his agonies increased.
"No!"
Susanna bellowed.
"It's evil!"
At once the string of wooden beads around her neck snapped, and Susanna O'Donnell was finally free of Nathaniel's control. Darting forward, she bit Miriam's hand and pulled herself free, then savagely punched Hillian in the ribs. The circle was broken. Susanna tore herself away and immediately found that she was back in the bookshop. At her feet, the fish monkey shrieked at her.
"The charm is ruined! You have destroyed its power!"
In the cottage, Ben retched until the ammonite was dislodged and spat it onto the bedclothes. Gulping down air, the boy collapsed onto his back, and when he had recovered enough, he examined the now inanimate fossil. It appeared the same as it had always done. But Ben flung it to the floor and leapt from the bed to look out of the window. All seemed quiet outside, and his breath quickly steamed up the glass. Yet in the misty condensation, he drew a mysterious sign and snorted defiantly.
"I warned you the hunchback was lapsing,"
Miriam snapped. Susanna was terrified. The expressions upon the witches' faces were deadly. "It was only a child," she pleaded. "I could not let you do that." The fish monkey lashed out with its claws, gouging out a ribbon of the woman's skin beneath each sharp nail. Susanna howled, and whirling around she fled down the spiral staircase and raced through the shop below. Miriam sprang forward. A bestial growl rumbled from her lips as she snarled and put her hand to her own necklace. A hellish light began to blaze in the almond-shaped eyes, and the varnish flaked from her nails as they quivered and grew.
"No!"
commanded Hillian.
"I shall deal with her."
Like the wind, she hared down the staircase and found Susanna scrabbling at the locked door. "Let me go," she begged. "I won't tell anyone, I swear. Oh, Hillian, please."
"You are faithless," the witch spat. "Your words mean nothing, and nor do you."
Hillian flew at her, wrapping her hands about the woman's throat. Susanna wrenched the strangling fingers away and ran towards the window. But down the spiral staircase, Miriam Gower had come and snatched up the largest book she could find. She brought it smashing down upon Susanna's skull, which splintered beneath it, and with a whimper she sank to the floor. "What shall we do?" Miriam breathed. "The police will come. We must escape while we can." Above them the fish monkey was calling, and the witches hurried up the staircase.
"Susanna is dead,"
Hillian cried.
"We must leave at once."
The yellow eyes became narrow slivers.
"Listen to me,"
it hissed.
"Panic no more. The body of your perfidious sister shall be taken for you. Do not trouble over such a trifling concern. Remove the mortal remains from this place and put them in the alley. At the precise hour of 3 this night something will come. It will be as if your sister had never existed."
Hillian nodded. "But what of the boy?" The yellow eyes closed fully as the creature reached out with his thoughts.
"Waiting is all,"
he said at length.
"The mortal scum is becoming aware of his own strength. It is vital we do not arouse his suspicion any further. My master must construct a new design. When the rest of thy coven is assembled, then we shall try again."
The fish monkey's voice began to fade.
My time is over. Summon me only when you are ready."
And with that it became a lifeless curiosity once more. At 3 a.m, a squelching darkness crept over the cobbles and moved purposefully towards the bookshop. Half hidden by the bin sacks, the body of Susanna O'Donnell lay upon the wet ground. When the dawn came, no trace of the body remained. No one ever noticed the wisp of red hair that was glued to the cobbles by a peculiar trail of slime. For in the afternoon the rain came, and the last fragment of Susanna O'Donnell was washed away forever. With May's glorious weather, Miss Boston continued to regain her vigour, and she had circled a date on the calendar. When Ben had asked her about this, she had vaguely replied, "The Horngarth is approaching." And one Saturday morning he trailed downstairs to discover the old lady well wrapped up and ready to wheel herself outdoors.
"Ah, Benjamin," she cried. "I wasn't sure whether to wake you. You had better change out of your pyjamas if you wish to join me. I'm afraid Edith has no taste for it, do you, dear?" "That I haven't," Edith twittered. "It's a thing I've seen far too many times. Why don't they liven it up a bit? It really is very dull."
Aunt Alice scowled.
"Not to me it isn't," she replied.
"But where are you going?" the boy asked.
"Why, to see the Horngarth, of course," she exclaimed. "It's the morning of Ascension Eve. Best hurry, you might pop in and see if Janet wants to come too."
Ben dutifully ran upstairs.
"Oh, get lost," Janet mumbled. "I just want to be left alone. Now get out."
Her brother did as he was told. Pushing Aunt Alice's wheelchair, Ben asked, "So where are we going?"
"To the harbour," the old lady replied.
"And that's where this Horngarth is?"
"Exactly. Gracious me, cobbled roads were never meant for wheelchairs. What a most unpleasant juddering."
Ben fell silent. Aunt Alice was being deliberately mysterious. Once they had passed the swing bridge, he could see that an immense crowd had gathered by the harbour wall, and all faces were cast down towards the river. Ben stood on tiptoe and jumped as high as he could to try and see what was so fascinating.
"I can't see anything,"
he said crossly.
"Don't worry, Benjamin, dear," Aunt Alice clucked. "We'll get a good view."
She gave a pathetic-sounding cough, then called to the people in front of them,
"Excuse me, can I get by? I'm an invalid."
The human obstacles squirmed aside and allowed Miss Boston and the boy to the front.
"There now," she chirped triumphantly. "That wasn't so difficult." "Oh, jolly, Dee," trilled a voice beside them. "It is good to see you out and about, Miss B."
"Sister Frances," Aunt Alice mumbled dismally. How fortuitous. Fancy bumping into you, of all people."
"I never miss the penny hedge," the nun gushed. "Sort of professional interest, you might say, and it really is so quaint. What do you think of it, young man?"
But Ben's full attention was commanded by the scene below. Upon the muddy shore of the river, a group of townsfolk were building a peculiar, flimsy-looking fence. They had stuck nearly a dozen sticks into the squelching ground, and were now weaving thinner and more pliable strips of twig between them. The odd structure hardly came up to their waists and could not have been much over a metre in length. It wasn't even connected to anything. They had just planted it in the middle of the shore, with only 2 sticks propped against each end for support.
"That'll fall down."
"It's supposed to," Aunt Alice whispered, "but not just yet. It's got to withstand 3 tides first, you see." She chuckled. "This ceremony is older than all our other festivals and totally unique to Whitby. The story of the penny hedge begins when Henry II was upon the throne. 3 wealthy gentlemen were hunting a wild boar. They bore down upon that unfortunate animal, crashing through the woods of Eskdale side, wild and greedy for the kill. Now, there was a holy man who lived as a hermit in the forest. The monk was praying within the chapel when through the open door the frightened boar comes charging. Exhausted and bleeding, it collapses and dies at the hermit's feet, and the man hears the hounds draw close. Quickly, he shuts the chapel door and returns to his meditation and prayers as the dogs fling themselves against the barred entrance, howling and whining. Then come the noblemen. Outraged that the monk should spoil their sport, they batter down the door, then set about the man with their staves. The holy man is mortally wounded, and the nobles fear for their own lives. Yet, before he dies, the monk forgives them and spares their wretched necks, but only on one condition. Every year, on Ascension Eve, they and their descendants must do a simple penance. With the aid of a knife costing a penny, they must build a small hedge at this appointed spot, strong enough to withstand 3 tides. With stakes, stout stowers, and yedders must the hedge be built, and if those who come after fail in this, then their lands shall be forfeit. Miss Boston grew silent, then shook herself. Of course, 2 of the families have since bought themselves free of the task, but it is a lovely, quirky ceremony. At her side, a voice began to recite softly. When Whitby's nuns exulting told how to their house 3 barons bold must menial service do. Sister Frances gave a gauche shrug. Sir Wally Scott, she told them. Marmion, oh, I adore this day. Just to think throughout all those centuries this has been going on every year. Simply splendid. And what magnificent forgiveness the hermit showed. It's a lesson to us all. Aunt Alice gave Ben a nudge. Of course, the legend is complete balderdash, she added wickedly. The ceremony goes back a lot further, from our pagan past. Seems to me much more likely to be a votive offering to the sea than anything else. Monks of the Dark Ages were always attributing religious explanations to matters they were afraid of. An offering to the sea, Ben murmured. Or a guard against it, she replied. Garth means an enclosure. But what does the hornbit mean? The old lady pointed down at the shore, where the penny hedge was now complete. A man stepped up to it and put to his lips a curved horn of great age. The blasting note trumpeted over the river. Then the man yelled at the top of his voice, Out on ye! Out on ye! Out on ye! A cheer rang out from the hundreds of onlookers, followed by applause. Why did he shout that? Sister Frances butted in before Aunt Alice could speak. I always thought it was to call shame on the family of those dreadful noblemen, but who am I to comment? I'm sure Miss B has a far more outlandish interpretation, however misguided it may be. Miss Boston chortled to herself. She was in an elated mood, and as the crowd began to disperse, she came to a swift decision. Without any warning, she lumbered from the wheelchair and placed her feet firmly upon the ground, gripping railings for support. Aunt Alice! Ben cried, as the old lady turned and took 2 shambling steps. Great heavens! Sister Frances exclaimed. How absolutely super you're walking! Be careful, Ben urged. Nonsense! Miss Boston roared, lumbering confidently against the rail. I'm perfectly... Oh! The old lady's legs buckled beneath her and her body went limp. Ben darted forward and grabbed her just as her head was about to strike the sharp corner of metal railings. She sputtered. I don't know what came over me. She returned to the wheelchair, then patted Ben's hand. Thank you, dear, she said gratefully. I might have cracked my skull open. Let us go home. I feel in need of a strong cup of tea. A little distance away, a white-gowned infant sadly hung its curly head and retreated into a dim alleyway. Forming an odd trio, Hillian Fogel, Miriam Gower, and the new owner of the cafe, Gilly Nugent, lingered longer than most. With their eyes trained on the boy pushing the wheelchair back up Church Street, they exchanged meaningful glances. Then they too left the harbour and returned to their businesses. Back at the cottage, Ben and Miss Boston found Dr. Adams sitting in the parlour with Miss Weathers.
Edith trilled, leaping to her feet.
"You'll never guess, you never will in a million years."
"I'm sure I won't," the old lady replied. "Whatever is it, dear?" Miss Weathers clasped her hands and let out a squeal of pleasure.
"Conway," she gurgled. "Conway has asked me to marry him."
Aunt Alice and Ben gaped at her, then stared at Dr. Adams. The fleshy man was bright pink.
"Congratulations," Miss Boston managed at last. "I hope you'll be very happy."
Edith gave a tiny dance, then blew her nose.
"Oh, we will," she breathed. "It's all worked out perfectly. You're getting better every day, so you won't be under your feet much longer, will you?"
"I suppose not. Well, it would seem that today is one for many celebrations." With a proud smile, Miss Boston lifted herself from the wheelchair and carefully tottered over to shake their hands. When the entire town had gone to sleep, a solitary figure waded out to reach the horngarth. Stooping, the intruder grasped the stakes which fixed the low framework to the shore and pulled. After several attempts, the hedge was heaved from the squelching mud and was carried off into the black shadows. Ben had not seen Nelda since she had dismissed him in favour of old Parry's company. Then, late one June afternoon, Ben saw her sitting with her back against one of the concrete supports of the footbridge, staring intently at something in her hands.
"Hello!"
he cried. "Oh, you startled me," she exclaimed. "Why sneak up like that?"
"Thought you might run off otherwise."
"Oh, Ben," she breathed with the faintest of smiles. "I offended you. I'm sorry." The aufwader's great grey eyes were rimmed with red, and her small hands were furtively concealing something.
"Is Tar okay?"
The smile faded. "I have not seen him for many weeks now. Since old Parry revealed my secret, I no longer dwell with my grandfather, nor do I speak to any other member of the tribe."
"But why?"
The aufwader looked down. "I bear the child of Esau. If you wish, you can depart and think no more of me. Do as the others have done."
"Nelda?"
She covered her eyes. "Again, I'm sorry. It is difficult to recognize friendship." Then Nelda told him all that had occurred, of Esau's evil bargain and the anger of the tribe, and her ultimate doom. Ben was horrified.
"Is there really nothing anyone can do for you?"
Nelda shook her head. "No. Only the lords of the deep and dark can save me, and they know nothing of mercy or pity."
"What will you do?"
"I do not know. Spend what days are left in what comfort I can."
"I know," cried. "Why didn't you come and live with us?"
"No," she said. "I am an aufwader, Ben. My lady's here." Suddenly the sky became filled with raucous shrieks. Nelda glanced up at the cliffs. "The gulls. Listen how affrighted they are. There must be something up there which they fear." Up they went until Nelda could manage no more. Warily Ben edged his way to where the screaming birds rode the wind and peered over their nesting ledge in horror.
"What is it?"
Nelda called.
"Snakes! Thousands of them! They've been eating the gulls' eggs!"
As Ben prepared to climb down again, he glanced along the ledge and noticed the sprawled bodies of many seagulls, a vicious and bloody ring cut around each limp neck. Then amidst the bodies there came a movement, and Ben saw that twined tightly about one gull's neck was a snake.
"They've strangled them!"
Ben gasped. But the worst was yet to come. Within one of the nests a single egg lay whole and undamaged, and he saw the shell judder and splinter. The nest was empty of snakes, but as the egg began to move, a deadly stream of serpents flowed towards it, rearing up in expectation. A small hole appeared in the shell, followed by another. Ben let out a petrified howl. "What's the matter?" Nelda cried. "Are you bitten?" In a moment he was at her side, then past her. Nelda hastened after him. "Tell me!" she yelled. "Ben!" The boy turned. "The egg!" he panted. "When it hatched, there was no chick in sight. It was full of snakes. They came out of the gall's own eggs. The birds must have been sitting on them when the first clutch hatched, and those filthy things wriggled out to strangle them. It's horrible. And how could snakes come from birds' eggs? It isn't possible." "'Tis a jest of the Deep One's devising," Nelda uttered coldly. "Thus are other mothers destroyed by their offspring. It is a terror to reveal unto me how mighty is their power. Who next will suffer for me and my unborn child? Who else am I placing at risk? Ben, go now, go!" There was no arguing with her. When she was alone, Nelda took from her pocket a disc of polished green glass and held it close to her chest. "Tonight," she whispered. High over the church of St. Mary the crescent moon shone cold and milk-white. Through the dismal graveyard Nelda made her way, and when she reached a grim yet familiar spot, she put old Parry's lens to her eye. Beside the weathered headstone she saw the ugly grey growth. Without a moment's hesitation she plucked the weed and lifted the vile herb to her mouth. "No, lass!" From the shadows a dark shape sprang and knocked her hand away. With tears rolling into his whiskers, Tar Shrimp crushed the weed beneath his feet. "Oh, Nelda," he blurted, throwing his arms about her. "Can never forgive an old fool. I'll not let out take thee from me, not while there's life in me bones. At the time of the next full moon I shall summon the herald of the lords of the deep." Retracing its footsteps, a robed figure slipped silently through the dismal gloom. It had witnessed all that had occurred, and a serene smile appeared beneath the deep hood of its robes. Miss Barton was now gleefully tottering everywhere, and Ben felt that the time had come for him to confide in her. "Dear, dear," she tutted, "those lords of the deep must be infamous beyond belief. Perhaps this has something to do with Prudence's warning. Thank you, Benjamin. Would you kindly keep me informed of any further development?" On the Friday before Edith's wedding, a bored jennet wound her way through the west cliff. She felt as though the town was smothering her, and away from here she felt sure she would be able to forget Nathaniel Crozier, and the yearning dreams would fade completely. "I just can't help but remember him here," she murmured. "God, when will I be free?" Very faintly, snatches of a tune were carried to her on the breeze, and it was so delicious that the girl hurried over the bridge. In Market-place, a crowd of tourists was gathered round a female folk band. One of them breathed sensual life into a wooden flute, and at her side a younger, more serious woman concentrated on the fiddle whose notes made Janet's heart leap. The third musician possessed one of the most beautiful faces the girl had ever seen. She was playing a sweet-sounding concertina as her lovely face nodded to the rhythm, and her long hair hung in a great corn-coloured sheaf. They were all dressed in richly coloured flowing clothes, and Janet was enchanted. With a combined shout, the trio ended their music and bowed as the audience showed its approval. Then, with a flamboyant sweep of her arm, the golden-haired beauty took up a tambourine and began beating it. "Shall we play you one more before we finish?" she asked. The people nodded keenly, and the beauty unleashed her ravishing smile upon the crowd, and every man yearned for her. "I've a mind to bring in my daughter on this one," she said huskily. "Per! Per! Where are you?" A girl not much older than Janet had been sitting cross-legged on the ground, but at her mother's summons she skipped into the centre of the area and took the tambourine from her. She was as raven as her mother was fair, and tiny Indian bells tinkled around the hem of her purple cheesecloth dress. "What is it to be?" the fourth member of the troupe cried. "The Ballad of Molly Werebride," her mother answered. This tune was a slow, haunting lament, and the girl called Pear opened her mouth and started to sing. She had a fabulous, throaty voice, which mirrored the high notes of the flute, and soared up to the sky entwined with its purity. Janet listened, spellbound. The ballad was a dark and cautionary tale of a young maiden who was seized by the hunting spirits of the wild, never to be seen again. When the song was over, the applause was tremendous. Collecting coins that had missed their target, the young singer drew close to Janet with a grin. "Did you like the performance so much you can't tear yourself away?" Janet smiled shyly. "I thought it was excellent. That last song was perfect. That one is a real favourite with me, too. I think if I was tied down to drudge in the one dismal spot for too long, I'd go raving mad and run off as well." Janet liked this strange girl, with her bare feet and ready laugh. "They call me Pear," she said. "It's actually short for a great mouthful, but what can you expect from a mother who used to be a teacher?" "Is that your mother, with the fair hair?" "Oh, you mean the really ugly one?" She nodded sarcastically. The girls laughed, and Pear's mother advanced towards them, her eyebrows raised quizzically. "Don't you listen to a word this vagabond tells you," she advised. "My daughter has no sense of what's polite. Are you coming, you savage?" "No," Pear told her. "I'll hang around here for a bit." "All right, I'll leave you and Janet. I'll leave you and Janet in peace." The two girls watched the trio set off towards the 199 steps. "I like your mum," Janet said. "Yeah, Meta's cool. Terminally vain, though." Janet giggled and realized that she had not felt so relaxed with anyone for a long time. "Where are you staying?" "We're parked behind that ugly church on the cliff." "Parked? So you're staying outside Whitby?" "No, our van's up there. Caroline, the one with the fiddle, owns a camper." And so she told Janet of the nomadic life the folk band led, not knowing where they would be from one week to the next. Pear was a unique character. She was nearly 16 and had never been to school, but had learned everything from her mother. Pear was also an excellent listener, and Janet revealed more to her in that short time than she ever had to either Aunt Alice or her brother. "Look," Pear said, "I'm starved. Why don't you come round and eat?" Behind the wall of the churchyard, Pear led Janet through the maze of cars to a cream and orange camper van. "Hi," Pear called. "I brought Janet back to try some of your grubblies." The freckle-faced woman gave a self-conscious smile. The girl's mother rose to greet them. "Hello, you two. How lovely to have company." Meta was queen of them all, and she knew it. Presently dishes were passed around, heaped with a rich-smelling mixture of nuts, rice, and chickpeas. Sitting upon the grass outside the van, they talked and talked, and soon it was as if Janet had known them all her life. Meta reached over and stroked Janet's hair. "Would you like some wine?" "I'm not really allowed to drink alcohol." Pear sniggered. "Why not? I was brought up on beer and wine, wasn't I, Meta?" "Only way to keep you quiet, lambkin. Here we are." She passed glasses around, and very softly Liz began to strum the strings of a guitar. The light failed, and the sky turned a deep hazy blue as Janet sipped the wine. The music mingled with the taste, and it was so lovely that she closed her eyes to fix this moment forever in her memory. Then, "Janet!" Sister Frances cried. "What are you doing here? And what have you got in your hand? Wine? Come here at once!" Striding between Pear and Meta, she took hold of Janet's arm and wrenched the girl to her feet. Pear giggled, but Frances berated the other women for leading Janet astray. You're right, Meta said in all seriousness. I think you had better return home, Janet. I don't want to, the girl cried. This is for your own good, dear, the nun declared, dragging the miserable Janet away. Looking over her shoulder, Janet could see that Per was as unhappy as she was. I'll see you tomorrow, she shouted. You'll do no such thing, the nun told her. It's the wedding tomorrow, and you'll bally well be there. The happiest woman in the entire world was Mrs. Edith Adams. In the space of 20 minutes, all her years of loneliness were finally dispelled, and she emerged from the registry office overjoyed. Congratulations, the pair of you, Miss Boston chuckled, leaning on only one walking stick. With her arm linked in that of her husband, Edith peered round for the children and squeaked for them to stop hiding and have their photograph taken. Ben stepped forward. All the ladies pronounced that he was as cute as can be and ruffled his hair. The lamentable outfit which elicited these unwanted attentions consisted of a frilly white shirt, silver-buckled shoes, and, worst of all, a kilt. Ben assumed a fixed expression for the photographer and wished the ground would open up. Janet was having similar difficulties. Not only had Edith made her wear the most hideous dress ever to be rejected from a doll factory, the ghastly woman had also compelled her to tie a massive pink ribbon in her hair. Aunt Alice shook her head at what her friend had done to them. Perhaps I should have interceded, she chortled. Oh, well, it's too late now. I don't feel very well, Janet lied, holding her stomach. I really would like to go home and lie down. Would you like me to accompany you? Miss Boston asked kindly. No, you must go to the reception, Janet cried. I mean, how would it look? Yes, Ben piped up. I don't want to miss the food. Very well, Aunt Alice consented. Come then, Benjamin. When they were out of sight, Janet hurried off to the camper van and pair, and the two girls talked and giggled all afternoon. When the other members of the band returned, they were pleased to see Janet, and it was not long before they all held a glass of wine. Caroline took up her fiddle and began to play a gentle melody. The sound was so enchanting, a feeling of belonging so special, that it began to lull Janet's senses. The battle to keep her eyes open grew more and more hopeless. Janet became aware of voices. Filtering through her clouded senses, the sounds were indistinct and distorted. She hauled herself up and pressed her nose against the side window. Outside the van was a barren landscape, which in the bright moonlight appeared all the more desolate. Indistinct shapes were absorbed in the building of a tall wooden framework a safe distance away from the camper. They were dressed in robes of billowing black, and Janet waved gleefully as one of them strode towards the vehicle. It was Per. "Ha!" Janet honked as the side door opened. "I must have drunk too much wine earlier. Where are we? And what are you supposed to be?" Per smiled. "I'm glad you're awake," she said kindly. "You do like me, don't you, Janet?" "Sure, you're my best friend." "Good, because you're mine too, and friendship's a marvellous unexpected thing for me. And at the end of tonight we'll be sisters." Taking her by the hand, Per led Janet towards the others. As she staggered past the figures building the near-completed timber structure, every one of the robed women smiled and warmly greeted her. The girl laughed. They seemed so serious. Meta stepped next to Hillian Fogel. "I can't believe this idiot is the one hope we have left." Standing before the finished bonfire, Janet swayed woozily. Around it the women gathered, their faces turned towards Hillian Fogel, their acting high priestess. "Sisters," she called, "tonight we are assembled for the first time in many months, and new sister is to be joining us. She's already halfway to being one of our number, for when he was alive, she was known to him. The priest's charm was on her, and is even now at work within her soul." Hillian raised her arm and pointed directly at Janet. "Welcome, Janet!" The other women began to chant Janet's name with fervent intensity. Hillian kissed the girl's brow. "Does your heart not still long for his embrace?" she asked. "Was there nothing you would not have done in his exalted name?" Janet blinked at her. The effects of the drug that had been put into her wine were beginning to wear off. "This is the collar of the sisterhood," Hillian proclaimed, holding up a string of wooden beads. "By this mark are the brides of Crozia known, and under its restraint were we subjugated to his will." The other women pulled down their robes to reveal identical necklaces. With great ceremony, Hillian fastened the beads about Janet's neck. "Now be the new link in his impenitent chain," Hillian called, and whirled round to face the others. "The initiate is joined. Coven of the Black Sceptre, we have a new sister." At this the witches hailed Janet as one of them. Mita crouched before the bonfire, and soon the whole of the wooden framework was leaping with fire.
"Nathaniel,"
the women whispered. "Nathaniel! Nathaniel!" "No!" Janet cried as the vile truth dawned. "Don't be afraid," Per assured her. "Come, dance with us." Round and around the roasting fire Janet stumbled, the passionate shrieks of the others terrifying her. Before the flickering light their forms blurred as all that was human was cast aside. Flesh rippled and bulged, and bitter claws spiked from shrivelling hands. The hindering black robes were thrown down, and naked in their growing fur the contorted creatures bayed at the moon. The necklace of beads constricted, and though Janet tore at it with her fingers, the thread could not be broken. With a tremendous effort she wrenched herself from the fiery ring. "I can't!" she managed to yelp. "I can't!" and fled over the moor, too frightened to glance round. Per looked to Hillian, who alone amongst the others was still partly human. Hillian growled, "Get you after her. Talk to her. Bring the fool back. Go now." The witch fell on all fours, shaking with the horrible power of change. Per caught up with Janet and pushed her to the ground. "Oh, please, let me go, just let me go." "Hey!" Per exclaimed in concern. "There's nothing to be scared of. I thought you understood. You're one of us. You knew Nathaniel, you loved him." "I didn't!" Janet screamed. "He was an evil, foul man. I'm glad he's dead." "That's not true," Per hotly denied. "Nathaniel was the most wonderful man I've ever known." Janet shook her head. "Can't you see that you're just his slave like I was? At least I discovered what he was like in time." Per pulled at the beads around Janet's neck. "You're wrong. You don't really hate him, or this wouldn't be so tight. It's your cherishing of him that keeps it there. And I'm not Nathaniel Crozier's slave, Janet. I am his daughter." Janet stared at the dark-haired girl. In spite of her anger, her fear, she suddenly felt an overwhelming sense of pity for her. "But I thought he was married to Rowena." "Don't be naive. In a sense, he was married to every member of the coven." "Why did they want me to join them?" Janet hissed. "When Morgaris killed Nathaniel, we thought it was all over. Then Hillian decided we should try to contact him on the other side. The message we received exceeded anything we had anticipated. Through the contact, we learned that Nathaniel had been the unwitting agent of a far greater power." "Do you mean that someone else wanted him to free the serpent?" Janet asked. "Who?" Per looked round warily, but the rest of the coven was still leaping around the fire. Have you heard of the Lords of the Deep and Dark? Janet nodded. That's who was behind it all, one of the great triad. The Lord of the Frozen Wastes wants to get rid of the other two. He wants to rule alone. And he needs the serpent to kill his brothers. Of course. Using my father, he could have done it, except... Aunt Alice stopped him. But that isn't the end of it, Père said. The evil member of the triad looked into the future and saw that it was written that his own end was near. A new, more terrible danger was taking shape, so deadly his death is practically assured. What sort of nightmare is this new threat? Janet asked, terror adding to terror. Père put her hand on Janet's. It's Ben. One day your brother will bring about the destruction of the Lord of the Frozen Wastes. That's why the coven is here. Janet, we're here to kill Ben. As soon as Ben is dead, the Lord of the Frozen Wastes will give Nathaniel back to us. That is the bargain Hillian has made with... She broke off. The night was filled with the vicious baying of the coven, and the sound was growing nearer. No, Père whispered anxiously. They're coming this way. If they catch you, they'll tear you to pieces. Great tears splashed down Père's face, and the witch girl gave the petrified Janet a desperate hug. I am your friend, Janet. I'll draw them off, lead them on a false trail. The road lies over there. Hurry! Janet staggered to her feet. Won't they kill you? Just go! Père raged. Janet stumbled forward, yet she could not resist glancing round to take one final look at Père. But the girl was already running towards the baying hounds, and as Janet watched, the black robe fell from her friend's body, and her human shape vanished as she too transformed into a sleek black dog that sped away into the distance to lead the others away. "Oh, God! Oh, God!" Janet cried, tearing through the scrubby grass of the desolate moor. Blinking in confused astonishment, Janet found herself upon the tarmac of the wide road that stretched for miles in either direction. Suddenly a bright light clicked on, and to her amazement she heard a familiar voice which she had always ridiculed. "Don't just stand there gasping like a goldfish. Jolly well climb aboard." There, straddling Miss Boston's old bicycle, with one large foot on the ground and the other raring to go on the pedal, was Sister Frances. Janet rushed over to her. "Quickly, sit on the handlebars. Hurry, Janet. Oh, sweet Lord, listen to those fiends. They're coming this way. Hang on!" Frances shouted, pedalling like mad. Behind them, furious growls and barks filled their ears as the infernal beasts gave chase. Their foaming jaws snapped, lunging for the rear wheel. "Get thee jolly well behind me," Frances puffed. "And stay there. Don't worry, Janet," she shouted. "There are lights ahead. I'll warrant those nasties won't chase us through the villages." She was right, for as they hurtled along the road, the old bicycle soon began to leave the yowling dogs way behind. Snarling, the brutes turned their massive heads, and the gleaming eyes vanished in the darkness. Lingering for a moment in the middle of the road, the smallest member of the pack watched the speeding figures of Janet and the nun fade into the distance. Then the dark instincts she had kept under control for so long at last took possession of the sleek midnight dog, and Père howled as viciously as the rest. A thought occurred to Janet. "What were you doing out there with Aunt Alice's bike?" "Well, I haven't got one of my own." "That's not what I meant," Janet said. "And why were you out riding at this time of night in the middle of nowhere?" "I might as well ask what you were doing out there," the nun answered blithely. When they came to Church Street, Sister Frances said, "I'd best entrust you with the return of this worthy steed to its rightful place." Janet looked into the nun's serene face. "Thank you," she said simply. Frances smiled, then shook herself. A puzzled look crept over her face. "Cripes!" she groaned. Mother Superior will really have my guts for garters. Whatever can the time be? Well, I can't stay here, can I? Up to my neck in hot water again. Oh, dear. And with that she hurried away, leaving a stunned Jennet gawping after her. Miss Boston and Ben had only just returned to the cottage when an angry knock rapped on the front door. "Gracious!" Aunt Alice cried, opening it. "'Pon my word, Nelda!" "Is she balmy?" old Parry croaked. Aunt Alice peered closely and apologized. "I beg your pardon. I'm afraid my perception isn't as gifted as Benjamin's. Don't be offended. Come inside." "I won't never set foot inside one of these poxy smell-holes," Parry snorted. "Just get a move on and be quick about it. The messenger of the great Triad is wanting the word, and I wouldn't keep him waiting." "How thrilling!" Aunt Alice clucked. "Whatever can he want with me? Quick, Ben." "What about Jen?" the boy asked. "Should I go up and tell her where we're going?" "Good heavens, no, we can tell her all about it in the morning. Come on." "Well met!" Miss Boston cheered, and waddling into the semicircle of fisherfolk who had gathered to watch Tar summon the herald with the horn of the deep, she nodded a greeting to everyone. The old lady gazed at the water's edge, where a small craft bobbed silently. The blue light of a lantern shone over the herald of the deep ones. "Your Excellency!" she cried. "I'm deeply gratified to be invited here." "Read!" Tar shouted at the herald. In his hand he held the Guardian, a carving wrought in jet, depicting a cruel and evil serpent that twisted about the trident symbol of the deep ones. "The Boston's here now, and I demand to be heard. Too long have we paid for the mistake of Una. Too many wives have perished neath the cruel might of the curse. Now, are them three what dwell in the deeps going to let my Nelda go the same way, or must I smash this contrivance and wake old Morgaris?" "Verily," the herald intoned, "the time has come for the grievances of thy race to be taken before the lords of the deep, but thou must deliver the message thyself." The fisherfolk stared at one another in shocked amazement. "Don't listen to him," Nelda said. "You mustn't go. You're all I have left." "And that's all I've got," he said sadly. "And that's why it mun be done. Here, take the Guardian and keep it safe. If it dinna come back by dawn, smash the thing to bits. Swear." "I swear." "Right, I'm ready." "Did I not say that thy voice alone would not be heard?" The messenger's clustering eyes were staring straight at Miss Boston. The old lady clapped her hands. "Do you mean to say I am to have an audience with the Triad?" Amusement was heard in the herald's voice. "Such is mine offer, Alice Boston." Over the immense cold sea the rowing boat flew. Suddenly Tar stirred. "What be that yonder?" Upon the rim of the wide salty world the sea erupted, and enormous spouts burst high into the night like a blizzard of cascading frosty fire. "Fear not!" the cloaked figure shouted above the seething din. "We shall not be harmed!" Towards the crashing waters the wooden craft sailed, smashing through walls of froth that stampeded against them. "Deeps take us," Tar breathed, as a wheeling fissure widened and became a huge black mouth. The herald mocked him coldly. "That is exactly what will happen." Up to the whirling threshold the boat sped, and the rolling curves of monstrous waves closed around them. Then with a lurch the craft shot down into the darkness beneath the waves. It was a mad, bouncing ride, and beyond the twisting walls of the spiralling vortex hideous creatures swam, undiscovered monsters of the deep that no human eye had ever seen. Suddenly the boat shot into a cavernous chamber whose vaulted roof was lit by hundreds of lanterns. But the whole of one gigantic wall was completely black. Rising from the lake of clear water was a tall finger of rock, wound about with a flight of stone steps. The herald bowed. "This is your journey's end. It is bidden that you alight here." Tar climbed onto the bottommost step.
"Thank you so much," Miss Boston clucked to the herald. "You took it a little brisk at times, but I wouldn't have missed a second."
Unexpectedly, the messenger leaned towards her and hissed,
"Beware, my lord of the frozen wastes."
The water around the boat foamed, and craft and messenger plunged beneath the waters.
"Come," said Tar, "we'd best climb these steps."
They cautiously ascended until they were standing on the wide, flat summit.
Tar stared tetchily around. "Even the deep ones want to hear what I've got to say, then why don't they show themselves?"
From beyond the furthest arch, a fabulous radiance suddenly welled up.
"Mooncalp,"
Tar murmured, squinting into the scintillating glare. Miss Boston saw that the far wall was a solid sheet of water, and then through the rippling liquid 3 monstrous shapes shimmered into view, the shadowy, writhing figures of the lords of the deep and dark. The mass of tentacles stirred upon the central throne.
"Hail to thee, Tar, son of Athi,"
the greeting echoed in their heads.
"It is good to look once more upon the noble countenance of thy kind. Glad were the days before the breaking of the laws,"
the Lord of the Circling Seas continued.
"Venomous was that time when Eska was born and we were sundered." "Aye," Tar cried, "and the poison of the curse still blanches us. Do you know how many of my kind, how many of them noble countenances have been blighted unto death because of one misguided blunder?"
The shadowy figure on the left-hand throne stirred.
"Much love was there betwixt the waders of the shore and the Triad," began the Lord of the Roaring Waters. "In those blessed days thy race were true to thy words and stout of heart."
Then the Lord of the Frozen Wastes spoke, and his voice sliced like razors.
"Brave and doughty indeed were the tribes of old, yet they did prove faithless. The punishment was a just reward. The crawling maggots are not to be trusted. Did not Earl steal our most prized treasure, and Esau did nearly bring about our destruction? For that alone they should be doomed into oblivion."
His brothers regretfully nodded their agreement.
"Then a foul damnation on yous all!"
Tar yelled.
"Earl stole that accursed shining weed to finish off the task that bungled. The enchantments which you placed on Morgaris wore thin, and so Earl needed a bit of that stuff yonder, and he knew they were so greedy he'd never part with the merest scrap, so he up and steals it and fashions a charm of his own devising to keep the villain asleep. Then what does you do, eh? That drowns the very one that saved you. And now my Nelda, what helped find Earl's missing guardian, is going to perish. Well, if never doesn't lift the stinking curse, that charm of Earl's is going to be dashed to smithereens, and then old Wormy'll come to get you." "Morgaris shall stay tethered in sleep," central figure rumbled. "For if thou wert to break the last guardian, then thine own doom and that of thy granddaughter would be hideous beyond imagining. Wouldst thou really submit that child to unending pain and suffering?" "What does thou mean?"
At the foot of the column the water bubbled, and the wooden boat rose to the surface. The herald bowed to his masters, sea-green cloak dripping with weed and brine. "Behold, see what horrors Nelda can expect. Once this cringing baseness walked amongst thy kind. In truth, he was one of thy greatest warriors, Earl himself."
"Still alive?" Tar cried. "After all these ages?"
"Oh, yes, we have many ways of extending the span of thy flickering lifetimes. Yet to live forever would be no punishment. There is always a price to be paid. Earl, show him." Very slowly the herald unclasped the cloak and removed the hood from his head. Miss Boston uttered a cry of dismay. Pale green was the deformed monster's slimy skin, and it stretched in sagging ulcerous swathes about the crippled frame, while 5 tentacles snaked out from beneath the grotesquely bent body. Tar turned away.
"A fine pet hath Earl made,"
the Lord of the Frozen Wastes declared.
"though he refused to reveal to us where our treasure lay hid, no matter what we did to him. Yet his every movement is an agony, and the very touch of his own flesh is abhorrent. Wouldst like dear little Nelda to be even as he, and suffer forever?" "No,"
Tar wept, kneeling and craving their forgiveness.
"The guardian shall not be smashed. I'd rather Nelda die than exist as such a nightmare."
"Then we do accept thy entreaty,"
the central figure murmured sorrowfully.
"The widow of Esau shall perish swiftly. Hast thou anything more to say?"
But Tar blubbered like a baby.
"He might have nothing to say," Miss Boston shouted, "but I most certainly do. Is this your great and vaunted wisdom? What are you afraid of? What warped and twisted pleasure do you enjoy from the misery of others? It isn't tears that flow into your precious waters, but the blood of innocence. Fie upon all 3 of you if you spill more. And remember this, there is a higher authority, and it is to him you shall answer."
"Enough!"
roared the Lord of the Circling Seas.
"Never before has an audience been granted to one of the lesser breeds of man. Yet if thou dost not put a guard upon that garrulous tongue, I shall let the waters roll over thy insolent head."
Miss Boston pursed her lips.
"Would it pray be too much to inquire exactly why I have been brought here?"
"Curious were we,"
the Lord of the Roaring Waters said softly,
"to look on the one who put the final chain upon Morgaris."
"Well," Miss Boston remarked, "if you hadn't botched the job in the first place, Nathaniel Crozier would never have been able to awaken the brute."
In a malevolent whisper the voice of the Frozen Waste said,
"The serpent may indeed be at rest, yet for how long? With the aid of the guardian thou wouldst be able to control the serpent and bind it to thy service. Is that not the reason for thy recovery?"
"I refute that ludicrous accusation absolutely."
"Then why hast thou cheated death?"
the Lord of the Circling Seas demanded.
"The date was set down, but the hour appointed has come, and still thou livest. Twice now hast thou evaded the angel."
"What are you saying?" she cried in bemusement. "I haven't the faintest idea."
"No?"
The Lord of the Frozen Waste's stinging hiss whipped into her mind.
"See, my brothers, the witch hath flouted our design and refuses to pass over. She conspires against us."
"Nonsense!" she laughed. I'm most awfully sorry if I haven't popped my clogs, but I have no intention of doing that for some time. I've done nothing to be ashamed of."
"Really? Is neglect not a matter for guilt and shame? Those in thy care, they have suffered."
"The children," she muttered. "But how have I neglected them?"
"Thy constant striving to regain thy strength hath made thee blind to their needs. Yet was it not for their sake that this self-healing was undertaken, or hast thou forgotten that also?"
"Of course not," she denied passionately. "I'm pledged to protect them. All I want is to be able to defend them when the time comes."
At this the shadowy figure upon the middle throne said,
"If that is true, then consign the boy into our care. He has our favour, and thus are we committed to guard and watch over him." "Beware, my brothers," the Lord of the Frozen Wastes interrupted. "The witch is not to be trusted. Is she not already tutoring the boy in the ways of her feeble craft?"
I'm not tutoring anyone, she announced, least of all Benjamin.
The Lord of the Circling Seas angrily replied,
Not so. The child has been studying thy book of shadows, and his knowledge increases with every moonrise. The child was brought to Whitby for one purpose alone, to aid the aufwader girl and discover the moon kelp.
Who did not bring Benjamin to Whitby? He came with Janet because of the...
Horrified outrage flared within her breast.
The children came to live with me because their parents were killed. They drowned. My God! You committed murder in order to manipulate one little boy and his sister. You disgust me.
Tar's face was drawn into an expression of hate.
Now I know why my Nelda was allowed to live. Her whole short life was leading up to that one moment when she'd help the lad find your poxied treasure. Ain't that so? Now her part's been done, she might as well die.
Shaking with rage, the aufwader spat as far as he could.
Damn yous all!
Miss Boston spoke up in a strident voice.
A curse on you, she said. I am now more determined than ever to protect the children from your unholy influence.
The boy-child has done us great service, the central figure boomed. Our prize is returned to us, yet still he associates with the aufwaders. Henceforth, this must cease.
Tar laughed.
The lad's more than welcome in our midst, and he has touched the moon kelp, and so is under our protection. There's naught that can do to stop him. We believe a solution has been found. Look to the water.
From the black depths, an object resembling a small stone burst into the air, then drifted towards the rock. Miss Boston descended the winding stair and fished it out. Glistening in her palm was a round earthenware jar no larger than a tennis ball. Removing the wax that sealed the lid, she warily looked inside. A pale, almost luminous cream filled the jar.
And what might this be?
The Lord of the Circling Seas replied,
The answer we have sought. Take the salve and anoint the boy's eyes. Never again shall he see the folk who dwell by the shore, nor the shades of those who have passed through the veil.
How dare you ask me to do such a dreadful thing? The old lady shouted. Benjamin's sight is a wondrous gift. I would not dream of stealing it from him.
The Lord of the Frozen Wastes swelled with anger.
Behold the ignorance of mortal kind. Let us destroy these two now, and send the herald back with fierce words of warning to those who wait upon the shore. Peace,
the voice of the Circling Seas called.
The leader of the aufwaders must return to make certain the guardian remains unharmed, and who can measure a human's heart? Perhaps our words shall weigh upon thee, Alice Boston, and thou shalt use the salve ere long.
I rather think that is highly unlikely, she replied.
The Lord of the Frozen Waters let out a wrathful shriek.
Then begone! He roared. Thou art dismissed!
At once the glimmering images were engulfed in darkness, and Miss Boston gazed grimly at Tar.
It would appear the audience is over, she observed.
As they drifted towards the distant shores of Whitby, the herald broke the forbidding silence that had fallen upon them.
There is fear in the deeps, he said. The Triad is afraid. 'Tis said that the Lord of the Frozen Wastes has dispatched many spies to watch the shores of my ancient home.
Leaning across to Miss Boston, the tormented remains of Earl whispered to her anxiously,
Cruel and devoid of compassion are my masters, yet they are wise beyond all others. Rub the salve into the boy's eyes. His sight is a curse, and only woe shall befall him and those he loves.
I'm afraid you cannot persuade me, he answered stubbornly. I will never use that despicable ointment.
The folds of the sea-green cloak stirred, and a putrescent, snaking tentacle emerged, creeping towards Miss Boston. For a brief second she feared that the creature was going to strike her. Then she saw that bound about the tapering tip was a piece of carved jet, suspended on a fine gold chain. "Unto thee do I now give this," Earl said gravely. "I fashioned it in the young long ago, when I was a leader of the tribe and resolved to quest for the moon-kelp." The old lady received the dark jewel silently. "When it is worn, it renders my masters and their agents insensible to thy presence. Without it I could never have stolen the shining treasure and wrought the guardian to keep Morgauras entombed. I fear that thou mayst have need of the charm's properties." As the vessel sailed closer to the shore, a large tear trickled down Tar's nose.
"I dinna know what to tell Nelda."
Miss Boston put her arm around him.
"Be honest with the girl. She deserves that."
"And may her ending be swift and without torment," the herald said gently. "And may courage be granted to thee, Tar of the Myriads." Tar bowed his head.
"I would ask her to join us," he said. "A mighty honour would it be for Earl to come amongst the descendants of his folk."
"No," the cloaked figure refused. "And if thou dost indeed revere my old name, then forget this meeting. Let not Earl's esteemed memory be clouded with the horror I have become. Go to thy people, Tar, but mention me never." The aufwader understood, and with a quick nod he clambered from the boat.
"Thank you for all you have done,"
Miss Boston said, and before the herald could stop her, reached into the shadows beneath the hood.
"Goodbye,"
she said warmly, as her hand caressed the scaly flesh hidden within. A strangled cry broke from the herald's mouth as the unlooked-for touch pierced his heart.
"Go now,"
he murmured thickly. Miss Boston smiled, and with Tar's help alighted from the boat. Janet jolted awake, the sunlight in her room telling her it was late afternoon. She had not meant to sleep. Where was Ben? When she had returned, the girl had found the cottage empty, and thinking that Aunt Alice and Ben were still at the wedding reception, had gone straight to her bedroom, determined to stay awake until they came home. But exhausted by weeping and the feelings of betrayal, horror, and isolation, she had fallen into a deep, uneasy sleep. Hastily she pulled on fresh clothes, wincing as her jeans dragged over the yellow bruises and scabbed scratches that covered her legs. Then she went hurrying downstairs. In the kitchen she found Miss Boston alone. "Where's Ben?" Janet cried. "In his room." Miss Boston caught her arm as she whirled to go to him.
"Janet, what has occurred to make you go charging around like an outraged Amazon?"
Words tumbling over each other, Janet told her story. When she had finished, Aunt Alice sank into a chair.
"How could I have been so blind? Janet, you might have been killed. I didn't even check that you were here. Oh, forgive me."
"Don't blame yourself," Janet begged. "It was my fault. I've been spoilt and selfish, and now they're going to kill Ben."
"Not if I have anything to do with it,"
said Aunt Alice grimly, and quickly told the girl what she had experienced the night before. A noise from upstairs signalled that Ben was awake.
"We must tell the lad," the old lady decided. "It's only fair he knows the danger he's in."
The boy entered and asked Aunt Alice, "When are we going to the cliffs? I want to spend what time is left with Nelda."
"The cliffs?"
she repeated.
"Benjamin, Nathaniel's followers are here. They want to kill you."
"I know that," he snapped at her. "They've already tried. Now I want to see Nelda one last time."
Before the old lady could stop him, he had pulled the door open. "Good evening, Ben," called a silvery voice. Janet cried out in alarm. Standing in the courtyard was Mita. The witch grinned. "How fortunate for me! I was just going to call on you." "Come in, Benjamin," Miss Boston commanded. Then, glaring at the witch, "Begone from this place. I'll not let you harm them." "It's only Ben we want," Mita said casually. "Janet isn't worthy to join us." Behind her came Liz and Caroline, and reluctantly, Pear. Controlling her dread, Miss Boston tutted in the most irritating way possible. My, we are getting desperate. Whatever happened to skulking about the shadows and frightening youngsters in the dark? Rowena did it so much better than you. You've never graduated from toad boiling and doll pricking." "Take care, old cripple," Mita shrieked. "You'll answer for that." "Not today, thank you." And Miss Boston slammed the door. Ben ran to the front room window. "There's more coming through the alleyway." Hillian Fogel strode between Mita and Liz and held up the fish monkey, which gave her a snarling command. At a nod from her, the other members of the coven joined hands and began to sing, and in the scarlet rays of the setting sun their faces were vivid masks of cruelty. "Benjamin," Aunt Alice said, "you stay here while I make sure the windows are locked upstairs." Ben kept a close watch on the figures outside. Behind him, Janet felt the music of the coven close around her, devouring her energy and conjuring up repugnant images in her mind. Eurydice the cat stared at her, and with a mewling cry darted from the room. In the courtyard the women's jaws pushed forward to form ravening snouts, and Ben gaped in horror. He became aware of a grunting noise directly behind him and turned around. "Jen!" the boy cried. The girl's eyes bulged from her skull, and throwing back her head she screamed, "Nathaniel!" and her limbs began to move, driven by a will stronger than her own. "Help me!" she wept. "I can't stop them! Oh, Ben, help me!" Her eyes fell on some African mementos Aunt Alice had intended to place in the parlour, and panic gripped her. "Ben, run! Get away from me!" Her hand seized hold of a rusted spear, and with tears streaming down her face, she aimed it at her brother. Ben let out a petrified yell and fled into the hall. "Benjamin, what—" Miss Boston's gaze passed beyond him to where Janet stood framed in the doorway, with the spear gripped tightly in her hands. "Aunt Alice!" the girl sobbed. "Make them stop! Make them stop!" "This is monstrous!" Miss Boston roared. Flinging open her arms, she drew a holy symbol of exile and banishment in the air, but the coven's control over the girl was absolute. The point of the spear came slicing towards the old lady and Ben. Aunt Alice shoved Ben up the stairs, then tried to wrench the spear from Janet. Into the kitchen they crashed, and dishes were thrown to the floor. Janet slithered on the broken crockery, and Aunt Alice pushed her away, then headed for the kitchen door, locking it behind her. Inches from her face, the wood splintered. The old lady edged towards the stairs as the broken door flew off the hinges. Screaming, the girl came charging up the stairs. Miss Boston shoved Ben into her bedroom and slammed the door in Janet's face. Outside, the fish monkey cackled shrilly.
"Plunge the weapon deep into the whelp's gullet! Strew his entrails over the sea!"
In her bedroom, Miss Boston and Ben cowered against the wardrobe as Janet lunged through the ragged hole she had made in the door. The girl punched and kicked, and with an agonized cry Miss Boston was knocked to the floor. "Jen!" Ben wailed. Sprawled over the floor, Miss Boston lifted her head just as the weapon plummeted towards Ben.
she shrieked. Outside the cottage, the coven's savage voices were drowned by a hideous scream. Abruptly the boy's shrill cry ended, and the fish-monkey widened a ghastly smile.
"Is it done?"
he cackled to himself.
"Is it over?"
From the upstairs window, Janet's distraught howls rose to an insane yell, and Miss Boston's appalled voice spluttered, "Benjamin's dead! Janet, you killed him!" The fish-monkey searched the cottage with his mind.
"The girl is descending the stairs, and only one other presence is within, one of great age, and the reek of death overshadows her. The wormling is no more!"
The door of the cottage opened, and Janet stared out at them, blood spattered over her clothes. Pear rushed towards her, and like a zombie, Janet allowed the girl to lead her towards the coven. Tar placed his hand on his granddaughter's forehead and withdrew it hastily.
"The lass is burning."
Since the setting of the sun, Nelda's condition had declined rapidly. Unable to stand the sight of her distress any longer, Tar shambled from the cave. He limped towards the water's edge, then fell to his knees. In sombre silence the rest of the fisher-folk watched their leader lamenting, and upon the horizon a jagged streak of brilliance suddenly lit sky and sea, and a peal of distant thunder rumbled ominously. Tar raised his ashen face, and his anger flared.
"Growl all that can,"
he bawled, shaking his fist.
"I knows it's thine there, well, it don't impress me."
Clambering to his feet, he turned bitterly to the tribe and roared,
"Bring out the black boat and bear my Nelda out here also. I want them 3 Nazards to look on her agonies. Get her, I says!"
Black, blanketing clouds had coursed in from the sea, and the brash wind scattered and whisked the mizzling shower, hurling it wildly about the ancient abbey ruins. High above the anxious figures of the coven, the imposing majesty of the abbey rose. Holding on to Pear, Janet staggered through the teeming blackness to where a large dark pool stretched into the farmland beyond. The surface of the black water sizzled as the rain pelted from the turbulent heavens, and with an exulting cry, Hillian Fogel raised the fish-monkey over her head.
"Hear me!"
she yelled.
"The coven of the Black Sceptre has done its work. The boy is no more. Our part in the bargain has been kept. Now bestow upon us that which was promised."
"Lord," the fish-monkey squealed,
"draw aside the curtain of death. Send back the one they worship."
A branching fork of lightning split the night, and Pear gave a glad shout.
"It's started!" she cried. "Look!"
And before the coven's adoring eyes, smouldering wisps of smoke curled up into the drizzle. A tongue of green flame leapt from the water, and with a flurry of sparks the pond ignited.
"Nathaniel," the witches hissed, "come to us, come to us."
Flames blazed furiously over the water, forming a twisted pinnacle of light that roared upwards, piercing the seething clouds. With a deafening clap of thunder, the towering flames stabbed into the heart of the storm, and blinding needles of snaking energy illuminated the whole sky. Within the rearing coils of flame, a familiar silhouette began to stir, and from the mouth of each witch issued a sensual and joyous breath. Pear stepped forward, disregarding the fierce heat of the fire, opening her arms in greeting.
"Father!"
she called.
"Father!"
The cliff shook as a mighty clap of thunder resounded from the sky. At once the flames dwindled, and the plain plummeted into darkness. Incredulously, Janet stared at the figure that was standing knee-deep in the black water. The most evil and callous outcast from humanity tilted his head arrogantly. Nathaniel Crozier, warlock, high priest of the Black Sceptre and destroyer of vulnerable souls, appeared exactly the same as when Janet had last seen him.
"Father!"
Per sang. "Persephone," his compelling voice declared. "Come to me, my little succubus. Let all my hounds come to me." With intoxicated whoops, the other women splashed into the pool to touch and embrace the lord of their lives, vying with each other to gain his attention. Mita threw her arms about his neck and kissed him fiercely. "Choose me tonight," she pleaded in his ear. He shrugged her off coldly, gazing at the two figures who had remained on the bank. With the fish monkey still in her arms, Hillian bowed to her high priest. "Hail to you, darling man," she called breathlessly. "My heart is alongside itself with cheer." Nathaniel grinned. "Bravo, Hillian! You have proven yourself most worthy of all my cattle. To you will the ring of amethyst go. You shall be priestess over them. Together we will accomplish much." In the new priestess's arms, the fish monkey raised its claws in salute.
"Thus hath my master fulfilled his portion!"
he shrieked.
"The bargain is complete! Behold the might of the all-powerful!"
Nathaniel stepped out of the pool and gazed at the ugly creature in disdain. "No one uses me, not even the Lord of the Frozen Wastes."
"Disclose not his exalted name!"
the fish monkey screeched.
"There are many spies eager to hear it."
"What do I care?" the warlock spat defiantly. "It was my will that controlled the great serpent, and I shall do so again. Then let the triad quake. I shall repay the Lord of the Frozen Wastes for using me."
Nathaniel's stare pierced the shadows where Janet stood rooted with fear, and his malevolent power cut into her. "Janet, you ought to have embraced me long ago, child. I invited you to, remember?" Unable to speak, she nodded faintly. A puzzled frown stole over the fish monkey's grotesque face. Per cried joyously, "This is my friend Janet. She's one of us now, Father. Without the sacrifice she made, you would never have been returned to us." "Then I have much to thank her for," Nathaniel purred. "My little maiden, won't you embrace me now and seal your fate with us?" Janet made to rush at him. All she wanted was to feel his caresses. Nothing else mattered in the whole world. Then the voice of the fish monkey sliced through her insane longing.
"Wait! All is not as it should be. I feel forces beating out a charm of concealment. Yet now the shadows they weave are dispersing. Ah! I have been cheated and deceived. The threat to my master is alive!"
The fish monkey clawed the air and screeched,
"He lives! The boy is not dead!"
He pointed a menacing claw at Janet.
"Thou hast done this! The lies did pour off thy poisonous tongue! This duplicitous wretch did murder no one! Her reviled brother still breathes!"
"It isn't true!" Per shouted. "Father, Janet did kill him. There was blood. We all heard the scream. Janet, tell them!" But Janet, knowing the blood was that of Eurydice the cat, could say nothing.
"Unwise was my master to put his faith in such as you!"
the fish monkey cried at them.
"So much for thy boastful claims, high priest!
What overreaching hope hadst thou of being the governing force behind Morgauris?
"Be silent," Nathaniel demanded, then struck Janet viciously. "You jeopardized the entire bargain. I might have been locked in the abyss for eternity. Now step forward." As his eyes burned away her will, she lurched over the grass. "Now kneel," he commanded. Janet wept and prostrated herself before him. The other members of the coven giggled in ghastly amusement at her humiliation, but with her cheeks streaming with pitying tears, Pear turned away. "Now you shall see how Morgauris would have submitted to me even as this child has done," Nathaniel declaimed, "for I am a master of control, and my will reaches out to the innermost depths of the mind. Mita, give me your athame." The woman unfastened her ceremonial dagger and handed it over. Nathaniel dangled the blade before Janet's face. "See the bright steel," he murmured. "Take it in your hands and put the blade against your ribs." Pear shuddered as her friend silently pressed the point to her chest. "Now, dear little Janet, push the blade in." The girl gripped the handle tightly. "Stop!" Nathaniel glared beyond her to where two figures came charging from the shadows of the abbey. A wooden smile lit the warlock's face as he recognized Alice Boston and the boy at her side. The old lady raced up to the girl and knocked the dagger from her grasp. Nathaniel regarded his old adversary with scorn. "Well, well," he muttered, "still tampering in schemes too great for you?" Miss Boston scowled at him.
"This has gone on for far too long. I won't permit it to continue a second longer. Janet, in the name of the Father, I release you."
Aunt Alice grabbed the wooden beads at the child's throat and tore them free. The warlock's influence was wrenched away, and Janet cowered from him in terror. The look on the warlock's face equalled the grotesque ugliness of the fish monkey. "That was the last time," he rumbled, "you meddle in my affairs. The hour of your death is long overdue, Harridan." Raising his hand, he pointed at Miss Boston, but she gave an impudent laugh and reached swiftly into her cloak. Into the driving rain she flourished the tattered pages of the Book of Shadows, and as a crackling spiral of lethal magic came battering from Nathaniel's outstretched fingers, held it before her like a shield. Aunt Alice stumbled backwards from the terrible forces that blasted against the book, and black sparks flew in all directions. All the spells of healing were devoured, and with a pitiful splutter the charms and incantations fizzled and were quenched. Miss Boston, shouting out a string of Latin, flung the dissolving volume straight at the warlock's head. In a blinding explosion of silver fire, the Book of Shadows erupted, and a ball of brilliant flame cannoned into Nathaniel Crozier, dazzling his eyes. Then, as the fiery stars perished, he stared at the place where the old hag had stood. Both she and the children had vanished. The fish monkey screeched its derision.
"It was but the simplest of conjurer's tricks," the creature bawled. "The crone is already heading for the abbey steps. Stop her, and bring the boy-child to me before it is too late."
Nathaniel snatched the ceremonial dagger from the ground and gave it to Mita.
"Get after them," he snarled. "Kill them all."
The golden-haired woman brandished the knife proudly and raced through the ruins.
"Mita!"
Pear shouted in dismay, tearing after her mother.
"No!"
The fish monkey waggled its repulsive head and glared at Nathaniel.
"Thou wert given new life, yet you have dared cheat the all-powerful."
Hillian laughed dismissively. "What matter is that to us now? The Lord of the Frozen Wastes has given us our high priest. That is all we ever wanted. I pray the boy does indeed grow to bring about the demise of the Lord of the Frozen Wastes. I am sick of his demands and your puling squeaks." With a raging screech, it launched itself upwards. Webbed claws tore into her flesh, and the needle-like teeth lunged for Hillian's neck. But they snapped only the rein, as Nathaniel dragged it from her and threw it to the ground. With a vile laugh, he brought his foot fiercely down upon the creature's back, and the brittle body shattered. The yellow eyes stared balefully upwards.
"Dost thou truly believe my mighty lord would be so unwise? No trust did he have in thee and thine. Ha! The Lord of the Frozen Wastes shall not be she!"
The ugly head rolled to one side, and suddenly the night was torn asunder as a blinding bolt of lightning flashed over the surface of the pool behind them.
"Miserable weather for such a long-awaited reunion,"
observed a pert voice. From the rain-splashed water a figure was rising. Her short, strawberry-blonde hair was held back by a black band, accentuating her fine-boned features, and a seductive smile played over her thin lips. "Roslyn," the warlock growled, "why are you here?" Wading through the pool, the woman who had lived in Whitby as Rowena Cooper murmured darkly, "Wherever you go, my dearest heart's blood, your wife must follow. I too have torn through the veil. We are united at last." Beneath the cliffs, the tribe of Aufwaders stood in a large and solemn circle, and sang the dirge of the black boat. In the centre of the lamenting circle, a narrow vessel of ebony rested against the rocks, and beneath the great fringed awning that covered the length of the craft, Nelda cried in agony. For the first time in many years, old Parry's pitying tears overwhelmed her. "Grandfather," Nelda pleaded, "do not let them kill my baby." Despairing, Tar clung to her, yet he could find no words to ease her torments. Into this sorrowful scene, Miss Boston and the children came blundering. Aunt Alice caught Janet's arm as the girl pushed on ahead of them. "What is it?" she asked. "The fisher folk. It would appear poor Nelda is dead." "No!" Ben cried, and he barged through the crowd until he stood at Tar's side. "I knew that'd come, lad. There ain't long." Ben took up Nelda's hand that Tar had relinquished. "Nelda," he said to her. "It's me, Nelda, it's Ben." She managed a desolate smile. "Ben, my human friend, don't grieve for me," she wheezed. "Remember our friendship in happier days." Miss Boston stepped forward to try to comfort Tar, and left behind, unable to witness the tragedy unfolding before her, Janet waited uneasily. She looked back in the direction they had come, and a horrified breath rushed from her lips. On the beach, loping over the sands, two figures were rapidly approaching. Without a second thought, Janet ran through the whirling rain to confront Mita and the black hound which bounded at her side. Holding up her hands, Janet yelled, "Get back! Don't come any closer!" Mita chuckled loudly. "I'm touched," she said. "You simply can't get enough of our company." "It's over, Mita," Janet said flatly. "I'm not afraid of you or Nathaniel any more. It's you who's chained to that vile man, not me, but you can't see it, can you? I have a real family, but that's something you'll never have." "I have my beloved when he wants me," the witch cried, "and Pear!" Janet glanced at the hellhound that snapped at Mita's side. "You have nothing," she said. "I won't let you harm Ben, not this time. I'm his sister, and I love him. I'll always be there to protect him. At the cottage the cat Eurydice scratched me and broke the hold you had on me, so that it wasn't Ben who died. I only came with you so that Ben could live. Then he and Aunt Alice came and saved my life."
"The boy must die," Mita spat. "If you wish to make a futile gesture trying to save him, that will merely make it more entertaining."
"I'm not the same child who idolized you and your daughter," Janet declared with a hard, growling edge in her voice, "and I don't need your beads to give me strength. I warn you, Mita, go back to your pathetic friends." Mita loosened her grip on the hound's collar and paced towards Janet, holding the glittering dagger before her.
"I'm going to relish carving you," she hissed, "and your little brother."
Janet let out a defiant howl. "I won't let you harm my family!" And with that she sprang, and her shape blurred, and suddenly a monstrous chestnut-coloured hound was in her place. Mita screamed and pushed Pear forward. The black dog pounced, and the two ferocious creatures went tumbling over the sand, their terrible jaws striking and tearing.
"Oh!"
Miss Boston breathed. The frenzied yowling filled the old lady with horror as she hastened towards the battling hounds. Mita hopped from side to side. It was impossible to tell which of them was winning. Then Janet was badly wounded and fell back.
"Kill her, Pear," Mita urged. "Drink her hot blood and tear the tender meat from the bone."
Her daughter growled menacingly, but instead of slaughtering the other animal, the hound's pink tongue tenderly licked the whining dog's large brown face. Mita kicked Pear aside and, stooping over Janet, brought the blade swiftly down. With a tremendous baying cry, Pear sprang at her mother, and Mita yelled in alarm. Without realizing what she was doing, the dagger plunged deep into Pear's ribs. "No!" Mita shouted, dragging herself out from under the writhing animal. "Pear, get up!" Upon the blood-stained sand, Pear regained her human form, but her life was ebbing away, and she looked imploringly up at her mother. "Pear!" Mita breathed, desperately trying to staunch the spurting blood. "What have I done? Oh, what have I done?" "It had to end," Pear murmured. "The killing had to stop." "Hush!" The woman wept, cradling her in her arms. "Oh, Pear! Oh, my baby! Help me, someone! God, help me!" Around Mita's neck, the string of beads broke, and with her dead daughter in her arms, the woman felt the full torment of what she had done. Shivering on the sands close by, a cruel bite bleeding on her shoulder, Janet buried her face in her hands. Miss Boston covered her with her cloak. She was my friend. She was my best friend." The old lady hugged her and looked sadly at Mita. From the direction of the cliffs, Nelda cried out with pain, and the old lady knew that the night's sorrow was not yet complete. With her head cocked insolently at the coven, Rowena Cooper cackled hideously.
"Look at you all, gaping at me like dummies in a shop window. My, what a ragtag bunch the coven is, I had forgotten."
Nathaniel took a step backwards as his wife crept nearer. "What is it you want?" "I am here because you are still the keeper of my heart." Rowena raised her arms to him and held them open, but the warlock knew his duplicitous wife too well to trust her.
"Deny that the Lord of the Frozen Wastes has sent you back," Nathaniel challenged, "for my ears are well used to the sound of your subtle lies. Tell me, what has been promised to you?"
But she made no reply, and the warlock began to feel unaccountably afraid. Raising his hand, he threw up a shimmering barrier of dark enchantment between them. "Oh, Nathaniel," she laughed, stepping leisurely through the seething spells.
Are you frightened of me? How clever of you." Rubbing her cheek against his, she pressed against him. The warlock tried to push her away, but the woman hugged him more tightly than ever. Her lips pushed over his spluttering mouth and lingered there despite his protests. And then, laying her head on his shoulder, the woman sighed with satisfaction. "It's done," she breathed, "and I am contented. Oh, my wretched love, you cannot be rid of me now. This is why I am here. This is why the Lord of the Frozen Wastes has granted me this one glorious moment. Oh, my fabulous husband," she hooted. "The Lord of the Frozen Wastes is my master, and I am to be the instrument of the all-powerful." "Hillian!" Nathaniel called. "Help me! Kill her!" The other members of the coven rushed forward, but there was nothing they could do. "Too late," she trilled. "My master has made me strong and given me life eternal, though in return I have sacrificed this human form." Her wild eyes flashed triumphantly before the warlock's fearful face. "Now I shall be free," she breathed. "But you will be a part of me until the end." And so Rowena Cooper abandoned her true shape and assumed the raiment which the Lord of the Frozen Wastes had decreed she must wear till the breaking of the world. From the wide, flapping sleeves of her black gown, a mass of tentacles whipped and writhed, and her face bubbled as her eyes ballooned into two great fragmented clusters, and her flesh sagged into grotesque blubbery rolls of slime. Nathaniel screamed as the wriggling, snaking nightmare bound its coils tightly about him, and with a braying rumble the pale underside of her deformed body flowed over her husband's frame and enveloped him just as it had Susanna O'Donnell. The warlock's screams were terrible to hear. Into the vast bulk of the wobbling creature he slowly dissolved, and a vile, sucking squelch boiled up from the greedy innards as Rowena consumed him. "Damn you, Rosalind!" he squealed as the liquefying juices swallowed him. "Damn you!" Within the massive, rippling body his final tormented curse echoed, and then was silenced. Emitting a satiated grunt, the loathsome apparition dragged itself over the ground towards the pool. Imprisoned in this horrendous shape forever, but contented at last, Rowena sank beneath the splashing surface, and the remaining members of the coven screamed hysterically. A tall figure moved in the deep darkness until it was standing at Hillian's side. Oblivious to everything except her overwhelming grief, the witch had not seen the stranger approach, and when a hand was placed lightly upon her jerking head, she was not aware of it. "Peace be on you," the newcomer said with infinite grace and kindness. "The time of your servitude is at an end." At once the beads about Hillian's neck broke and were scattered in the mud. "No longer shall you be a slave to the memory of that evil man," the warm voice told her. "You are released." Hillian gasped and watched as her deliverer released each of the women in turn. "Thank you," she sobbed. Sister Francis smiled benignly. "Hear me now. Cast away your fears, for Nathaniel Crozier will never return. Blessed are you, for the freedom of choice is returned unto you, and if you are indeed repentant, then your sins shall be forgiven." Bowing her head to them, the nun turned, but her attention was held by a livid light that glimmered out at sea. "What is it?" Hillian muttered. "The Lord of the Frozen Wastes himself is coming. Sister Frances said quietly. Upon the shore, Miss Boston cried, "The Deep One! Is it he?" Meta nodded gravely. "All is lost for him now. His designs are in ruin, and soon his secret treason will be known to his brothers. He has nothing left to lose, for they will surely destroy him." The sea churned as the Lord of the Frozen Wastes rose from the fathomless regions. Oblivious to the terror that encircled her, Nelda cried out and clutched Ben's hand despairingly. The boy flinched as the aufwader crushed his fingers and stifled a scream. Nelda's skin was bubbling. Huge blisters filled with salt water were swelling over her face and hands. A deafening thunderclap split the night, and the jagged forks of blinding light smote the seething surface of the sea as the Lord of the Frozen Wastes reared up from the deep. About the immense brows a coronet of green stars blazed, and the repellent countenance that was revealed beneath their lurid glare made the crowd on the shore call out in dread. A forest of tentacles came thrashing like an army of gigantic snakes. Spreading before the immeasurable enemy, the monstrous coils broke from the waves and reached through the sky. A darkness deeper than the brumal night descended over the shore, and the fisherfolk squealed in fear and panic, clinging to the boat as the sea charged towards them. Into the stone of the east pier the first of the squid-like limbs tore, and huge chunks were dragged down into the frothing water. The small lighthouse toppled with a thundering crash as the tentacles smashed and drove into the foundations. Ben pulled himself free. "Benjamin!" Miss Boston called as he ran towards the town. "Come back! Ben!" Janet shrieked. "Don't leave us!" But the boy raced on. The shore trembled as the full wrath of the Deep One was vented. Down came the harbour walls, and death screams filled the night as the inhabitants of Whitby were shaken from their beds and buildings slid into the river. A petrifying cackle blasted from his cavernous mouth as his gigantic lidless eyes fell upon the pinnacles of the abbey perched on top of the cliff. Into the sheer walls of shale his winding limbs pounded, and the twisting malice tore into the abbey. Inside Miss Boston's cottage, Ben dashed from his bedroom and leaped down the stairs. Under his arm the boy clutched a bulky object wrapped up in his duffel coat, and with his heart beating madly he flew out into the courtyard. Into Church Street Ben ran, dodging falling masonry and hopping over trenches that gaped in the cobbled ground. Heaps of debris had replaced the quaint shops. Burst water mains gushed tall fountains over yawning pits, and the first of many fires was already burning in the wreckage. Through the devastation the boy carefully picked his way, forcing himself not to hear the desperate cries calling from beneath the rubble, and scrambled down onto the sands. Behind him, Whitby was swept into the swollen river. Yet upon the shore, Miss Boston, Janet, and the fisherfolk stared up at their doom. As a great black mountain, the Lord of the Frozen Wastes lowered in the hell-torn sky. The faces of the insects that grovelled on the rocky shore were graven with terror. For this one moment of revenge, the Deep One had spared them from the cataclysmic upheavals, and he savoured their raving fear.
"Now!" he bellowed hideously. "Go screaming into the abyss, for the hour has come for all of you!"
Like an immense tidal wave, his vastness obliterated the sky, and the tempest of his wrath plummeted through the gales. In the deepening dark, Miss Boston squeezed Janet tightly, while at their side Tar kissed Nelda's shrivelling hand. Fighting through the screaming storm, Ben clambered over the ruins of the footbridge, and even as the mighty god of the waters avalanched from above, he cast aside his old coat and held aloft the thing he had taken from the cottage. There in his grasp, swinging madly in the charging gale, was the penny hedge. The flimsy fence of twigs and sticks that Ben had stolen and kept hidden beneath his bed these many months tugged and pulled at his hands, but he gritted his teeth and gripped it firmly. In the black, freezing shadow of the Lord of the Deep, the boy glared up at the plummeting nightmare, and a fierce snarl twisted his young face. With his hair streaming in the shrieking wind, Ben threw back his head, and in a loud, clear voice he yelled, "Out on ye! Out on ye! Out on ye!" Suddenly the horn garth crackled, and with a burst of fiery sparks, the woven twigs became blinding white flames. Up into the gaping maw the dazzling light shone, illuminating the grotesque contours of the infernal face, and as the age-old power to withstand one more tide beat out from the penny hedge, the Lord of the frozen wastes let out a deafening scream. Upon the Deep One's wrathful brow the crown of stars dimmed, and the ancient force of the magical barrier fell furiously about the evil member of the Triad. Chains of enchantment ripped at his titanic form, binding and holding him, until the terrifying apparition could no longer move, caught in a net of primeval magic. "Begone from the waking world!" the boy shrieked. "The powers of the deep have no dominion here! The time of the gods is past!" Miss Boston and Janet shuddered in disbelief. The boy's voice was changing. It had become deeper than his own and was filled with arrogance. "Gone are your temples!" Ben yelled. "Forgotten is your memory, for no more does the world need you! Humankind commands here now! Return into the void of neglected memory and be a whisper on the wind!" As he shouted these proud, insolent words, a shadow crept over the child. As Miss Boston and Janet watched in horror, the boy's features shimmered as Ben journeyed into his own future, until standing beneath the Lord of the Deep was a swaggering, middle-aged man whose face was cruel and full of conceit. "Ben," Janet breathed, "what's happened to him?" Miss Boston mumbled sorrowfully. "That," she replied, "is what your brother will become." "Without us you are nothing," the braggart continued. "I am lord above the waters. Crawl into your noisome holes and be glad that Lawrenson is merciful." "That is why the Deep Ones fear him," Miss Boston muttered. "Look at that ruthless face. There is nothing he would not do. There is no compassion in his eyes. Great heavens, what have I nurtured?" Running over the shore, the girl called to the dreadful vision of her brother. "Ben! Ben!" The man glared down at her. A repulsive sneer flickered over his face, and he regarded her with contempt. "Flee while you can, little sister," he laughed, and the foul sound pierced the girl's heart. "I have no need of a puling family. I am all-powerful, a master of control and domination. Run back to the old hag. You're nothing to me now." "Ben!" she wailed. The man guffawed to see her pain, but then his face fell, and he stared furiously up at the white flames of the penny hedge. They were dying. "No!" he screeched. As the light dimmed and the forces of the Horngarth were utterly spent, the man that Ben would one day become let out a terrible roar, then faded. Only a charred skeletal framework remained of the hedge, and grasping hold of the brittle, torrified twigs, an 8-year-old boy staggered in bewilderment, aghast at his evil destiny. Ben! Janet cried in relief. But the power of the Horngarth had gone, and the Lord of the Frozen Wastes was released. Yet raging in from the far distance, rampaging through the wild surf, came two immense towers of darkness. From the distant reaches of the world, the Lord of the roaring waters and the Lord of the circling seas came storming. The earth tipped, and the shore buckled as the powers of the world did battle until all was darkness. Not a sound disturbed the eerie peace.
"Jen," the boy whispered. "Are you there? Ben, where are you? I can't see."
Aunt Alice's familiar tones echoed from the pitch-black void.
"Gracious,"
she uttered in a small voice. Very faintly, a pale radiance glimmered in the distance, and a wonderful dawn edged over the rim of a placid, rippling ocean. Miss Boston and the children were standing upon a sandy shore. Behind them a curtain of shadow shimmered darkly, but before them lay a stretch of sparkling water that shone like crystal.
"It's beautiful,"
Janet breathed. Suddenly an amazing sound cut through the sweet air, and Miss Boston and Ben whirled round in astonishment. There, sitting up within the black boat, with her head in her grandfather's arms, was Nelda, and huge tears were rolling down her face. Ben darted over to them, spluttering with delight, and saw that the tears Nelda wept were tears of joy, for in her arms was a newborn child. The infant gurgled happily, and Nelda laughed and stroked the baby tenderly. "It's a boy," she told Ben. "Look, isn't he perfect?" Tar grunted sagely.
"Ah, him a shrimp right enough."
Around the black boat the hazy shadows retreated, and the rest of the fisher-folk shuffled in a daze onto the gleaming sands. The aufwaders stared at the mother and child, dumbfounded. Then the sea-wives clustered around Nelda to weep and fuss.
"Be jubilant, and banish your dread," proclaimed a loud voice.
Everyone turned.
"I don't believe it," Miss Boston cried. "What are you doing here?"
Sister Frances strode to the water's edge. Gone was her ungainly gait, and a strange tranquillity glittered in her large eyes.
"Your time of sorrow has ended," she told the fisher-folk, "for the mother's curse has indeed been lifted. May that infant be but the first to bless your tribe in the days that are to come."
"How can that be?" asked Nelda. "What miracle has occurred?" Sister Frances smiled.
"The Lord of the Frozen Wastes is no more," she replied. "His evil has been purged from the world, and his dark soul banished to the outer reaches of the void." "Just one moment," Miss Boston called. "Are you trying to tell me that we have been returned, that this place is—" "You are where you were," Frances answered. "Behold!" She flourished her hand towards the churning shadows behind them, and as they stared, the darkness melted. Rearing high into the clear sky was a towering wall of shale, and jutting from the top of the cliff like a jagged fang of rock was the abbey. The mists receded further, and beneath the glorious sunshine the harbour flashed and glimmered. Whitby was restored. Tar dropped humbly to his knees. "Praise the laws of the deep and dark," he murmured. "There ain't nowt they canna do."
"Not so," she replied. "For at the side of joy there runs also grief. See, they cannot undo what they have had no part in." Sister Frances pointed along the shore, where the figure of Meta still nursed Pear's body. Janet lowered her eyes, and silently mourned her friend. Aunt Alice keenly scrutinized the figure that purported to be Sister Frances.
"Who are you?" she asked. "What happened to that idiot with the jolly cheer-up bag?"
"She is here," the white figure replied, "though her mind is at rest. You must know, Alice Boston, that not all possession is evil. But now the time has come for many partings." She gestured to the sea, and they saw a fleet of small rowing boats floating over the peaceful waves, and standing at the prow of the foremost vessel was a figure arrayed in a tunic of bright silver. It was an aufwader, but one such as Ben had never seen before. About his proud head was bound a circlet of purest gold that appeared to burn over his noble brow as a crown of flame. Around the stranger's shoulders long sand-coloured hair streamed in the breeze, and the face which it framed was etched with wisdom.
"By gow!"
Tar exclaimed. "It isna."
"Oh!"
old Parry blurted.
"So he, too, has been forgiven," Miss Boston sighed. "Splendid!"
The boat which held the former herald of the deep ones floated to a halt at the water's edge, and Earl turned a great glad smile upon them.
"Hail to thee, Tar of the Myriads!" he saluted.
Then Earl fixed his large green eyes upon Miss Boston. "Hail to thee also," he greeted her, "queen amongst mortal kind."
"Most gracious," she mumbled.
"The mighty ones are in truth merciful," Earl proclaimed. "They have repented of their anger towards our race." Many tears flowed from the fisherfolk, but as the other vessels glided to a halt, Nelda eyed them uncertainly. "Why are there so many empty boats?" she asked. "Who is to sail in them?" Earl turned to her. "Compassionate the deep ones might be, yet they will not suffer thee to live alongside the human kind. I have been sent to guide thee away."
"Where to?" Ben asked. "Can I still come and visit them?"
"No," Earl said sadly. "The deep ones have toiled unceasingly to raise an island in the far girdling waters, and around it they have woven a mist which no mortal ship may penetrate. The race of the aufwader is passing out of thy world, child. Their dwellings upon the enchanted isle will be forever beyond man's reach." A large tear rolled down Ben's cheek as he looked at Nelda.
"I won't see you again."
"Oh, Ben," she cried as her own tears flooded out, "I'll miss you so much." Passing the infant to her grandfather, Nelda gave the boy a fierce hug.
"Don't forget me,"
he blubbered. "How could I do that?" she wept. "Look at this child of mine. Hold him in your arms before we part." Ben held the infant gingerly, and the tiny face gurgled up at him. "Likes you," Nelda murmured. "See, my son, this is the one you were named after. Yes, my dearest friend, he too shall be called Benjamin." Miss Boston dabbed her own moist eyes and turned briskly to Tar.
"So, this is goodbye, Mr. Shrimp," she said. "I can't say as I'm pleased. Whitby will be a sad place without you and your kind. It seems as if all the mysteries are fading, and the world is becoming woefully dull and grey."
"Farewell," Tar grunted. "If the tribe does flourish, then there knows there'll be some young Bostons and Alices amongst the tykes." The old lady grinned, then walked up to Ben and removed the amulet from around his neck.
"I really think we should return this to you," she said to Earl. "I don't suppose we shall be needing it again. Thank you so very, very much. We really are most grateful."
"Nay," he told her, 'Tis my masters who are in thy debt. But dost thou recall what they said unto thee?" Miss Boston withdrew her hand and said nothing. Earl shifted his gaze to the fisher-folk, and in a loud, commanding voice declared, "Now is the hour of parting. A long journey lies ahead, and this night you shall step upon a strange shore." In mournful silence the tribe boarded the small bobbing craft, their eyes trained on the familiar contours of the cliffs, fixing the image in their hearts. With her baby in her arms, Nelda slowly followed her grandfather. "Wait!" Ben cried, splashing after. In his hands the boy held a small green jar. "The sight is too terrible a gift," he said. "The glimpse of what I might one day become was enough to make me realize that. Besides, if you're not going to be here, then there's no point having it, is there? But please, would you be the one to take the sight from me? I'd like it to be you." With a sad smile, Nelda tenderly anointed Ben's eyelids. Miss Boston came to stand at the boy's side as Nelda clambered aboard their boat. Ben's vision became hazy. Already the fisher-folk were fading. "Farewell, Ben," came Nelda's forlorn voice. "Farewell, my human friend." A white mist rolled over the surface of the sea, and the fleet of rowing boats turned gracefully in a slow circle to meet it. Soon only a low cloud could be seen drifting across the sea, and it passed far into the vanishing distance. Ben wept uncontrollably, and the old lady patted him gently, wiping her own tears away. "Are they gone?" Janet asked. "Yes," Miss Boston nodded. "The old whalers of Whitby town have departed." "Ben," his sister said awkwardly, "I'm sorry. I really am." Aunt Alice entrusted him to her care as she turned to look at Sister Francis. But the nun was staring down the beach to where a small figure dressed in a gossamer nightgown played in the shallow surf. The golden-haired child lifted his head to gaze at Miss Boston, and the old lady gasped as the bright blue eyes shone out at her. "What must I do?" she asked. "I cannot advise in this. You will do as you have always done, Alice Boston, what is best for those you cherish, and may a blessing be upon you." Miss Boston considered, then breezed gladly towards the children. "My dears," she laughed, "what an adventure we have had! Won't there be a lot to tell Dithery Edith when she comes back from the Isle of Wight? My goodness, I could make short work of a hearty breakfast. Would you be so kind as to run ahead and start cooking the kippers for me, Janet? You go with her, Benjamin. I'll be along soon." The children began trudging up the shore towards the town, and Miss Boston glanced back at the infant who was beckoning her. "Come on, Alice," she huffed, taking a deep breath. "Let's show them what we're made of." Flinging her cloak over her shoulders, she marched towards the small waiting figure, with her chins flattened against her chest and a determined expression fixed on her wrinkled face. The shining form of Sister Francis watched as the child gave a delighted chuckle and raised its chubby hands to the old lady. "Now be at rest," the child beamed. "Your cares are over." With his merry laughter floating on the air, he began to lead Alice Boston into the sea. Sister Francis smiled faintly. Then her eyelids fluttered, and she put her hand to her temple as her legs buckled beneath her. Upon the cliff-top, in the windows of the abbey, a beautiful radiance gleamed fiercely for a moment, shining far into the clear sky, then was gone. The sands appeared dull and chill, and dressed in her usual drab robes and black woolen stockings, Sister Frances gawped about her. "Lummy," she gushed, "what am I doing here?" But there was no one to answer her, and in Miss Boston's cottage in the ancient town of Whitby, as another bright and peaceful morning was unfolding, Ben stood at the front room window and rubbed his eyes in wonder. "Jen," he murmured feverishly, "Jen, the ointment, it's wearing off." Janet ran over to him. "Ben, what's the matter? What have you—" Her voice died, for she too looked at the figures who were walking up to the cottage, and she clasped her hands over her mouth as she burst into tears. "You see them!" Ben shrieked. "You see them! The lords of the deep and dark can do anything, anything!" The children raced to the door and wrenched it open and ran into their parents' arms. And that is the end of the third part of the Whitby series.